Everybody, welcome. Welcome, everybody. Let's get started. Please take a moment, since we're starting early, 1 hour. Please take a moment to um, like and repost the space and share it with your followers so that people know that we're starting early. All right. Um, Overall markets are flat as a pancake today. Tesla stock is down 1.2%. Nvidia up 1%. Let's see what else. Palantir is down slightly. ARM is down 5%. I wonder what's going on there. Apple up 1%, Meta up 1%, Google down 1%, Microsoft down 1%. So it's a mixed market. It's very much a mixed market today. Meta stock has been up on a roll. Um, it's been up every single day for the last month, which is amazing. I'm not sure what's going on with Meta stock. If anyone knows, I would love to hear it. Up every single day for a month. Don't think I've ever seen that before. It's like you can't lose. Coinbase is down 8%. Like I said, ARM is down 5, Intel is down 4. Let's see what's going on with ARM. Metastack continues record run. Prime example of implementing AI, according to Yahoo Finance. Nvidia exits, SoundHound cuts ARM stake. Maybe that's what it is. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Okay. Any questions, comments? We're waiting for Meta to join us so that we can discuss Tesla fundamentals and on Project Titan. So AI research we're going to discuss today, but we're going to first start with Tesla fundamentals when he joins. In the meantime, any questions, comments? Now is the time to come up and chat about anything you want to. And let's kind of see what's going on. Stocks advance, yields fall as U.S. data, tariffs assessed. A gauge of global stocks rose on Friday, while U.S. Treasury yields dipped as a round of soft U.S. data and the latest tariff announcements raised hopes the Fed may have leeway to be more aggressive in cutting interest rates. I don't think that's going to happen. The inflation data is really high. I mean, CPI is up 3.5%. PPI is up 3.5%. Today we got import-export prices that are also high. So inflation data as a January is still very high. And I don't think Powell was very clear that they're not looking to cut rates anytime soon. And the market is not pricing in a July rate cut. A rate cut by July is estimated to be about 60% probability. And then by December, the market is expecting 1.5 cuts, so 1 to 2 cuts. The Commerce Department said retail sales dropped 0.9% last month, the biggest decrease since March 2023, after an upwardly revised 0.7% increase in December, and well short of the 0.1% decline estimate of economists polled by Reuters. Now, that was a massive drop in retail sales in January. If I look at GDP now was revised down from 3.9% just a week ago to now 2.3%. So almost half. And as we know, Q4 data was revised down as well. So December, January data is being revised down very rapidly. on the GDP front. And if you dig into the details here, today's revisions came in the form of downward revisions to personal consumption expenditures, obviously. Retail sales are the biggest factor in GDP. But on top of that, non-residential structures was down -19%, estimated to be in Q1. These are annualized rates, seasonally adjusted annualized rates. And residential investment was revised down from 2.4 to 1.8%. So, and then also export imports, sorry, inventories was revised down as well. So, yeah, this is a massive, massive miss on retail sales. And if it happens one more month like this, then we might be in a recession already. But we need to see more data. I mean, we're not like it's not evident just yet. But today's downward revision obviously is a big one. Let's continue with this article. We're still waiting for Meta to discuss Tesla fundamentals, followed by an AI research paper. There he is. Speak of the devil. Commerce Department said we talked about retail sales. Other data from Fed showed factory output dipped 0.1% last month. Charlotte estimate calling for a 0.1% increase after a downwardly revised 0.5% rebound in December and a sharp drop in motor vehicle output weighed. Meta, how are you?
Unfortunately, I've caught a cold, but I'm doing good.
Oh, okay. You didn't let me catch that.
I know you would have got it easily.
Yeah.
Your talent isn't telling me I'm sick before I know I'm sick. If I already know I'm sick, it's
Yeah,
not really impressive.
right, exactly.
Had you
Um,
told me yesterday, that would have been better because I did come to your space, but you didn't give me the warning. I didn't get to use the vitamin C. You're off your game.
yeah, I know. Um, please take a moment to like and repost the space since we started early. Let people know, let your followers know we are starting early. Meta, what did you think of today's retail sales numbers?
I honestly haven't looked yet. I'm just waking up.
Um, yeah, retail sales for January. I mean, Steven's here. Steven UC, if he wants to come and chat about it. Retail sales numbers in January massively undershot expectations. And I suspect that if we get one more month like this, where a lot of economic data is underwhelming, especially on the growth side, then we might be in a recession. Steven, why don't you say a couple of words and then we're going to switch back to Tesla? You see?
I see him as a listener for what it's worth.
Oh, okay. I'll send him an invite. If he accepts the invite, that may work. Okay, Meta. What do you want to talk about on Tesla? Did you read the article? Actually, hold on one second. You see, do you have a couple of words on GDP? You see, cat your phone? Do you have your mic on? It's okay. We don't really care what you think anyway. So, Meta, what do you think about Tesla? What do you think about Tesla article that I published? I'll pin this up here too. 80% drop predicted.
I think it's interesting and it's good that you're publishing your thoughts. It's not grounded in a lot of math, so it's hard to like see how you derived the numbers. I think directionally you're identifying valid things. I kind of read it, if I'm honest, I read it as if I was going to look at a bear case, the absolute barest of bear cases. That's where I would start. It didn't seem like you left a lot off the table. So it doesn't seem like a medium case, right? It looks like a strong bear
Oh,
case.
what are you talking about? I left a lot off the table when it comes to that bear argument. The article is getting too long. I
What
got way more. I didn't even touch on Elon. I didn't even touch on Elon's saga, the Nazi salute, and all that. I mean, that's all
Fair.
happened in the last couple of weeks here, so that's obviously going to weigh on Q1 deliveries across the world. I didn't touch on macroeconomic expectations. I didn't touch on Elon being a part-time CEO, if at all he's paying attention. I didn't touch on Elon at all in the article. I could have touched on V13, how it's underwhelming, how it's the rollout is taking forever, as I predicted in October. I didn't touch on much on BYD. I could have done product comparisons, growth comparisons. I didn't touch on any of this. I have a whole list I didn't get to.
Okay, that's fair.
Um,
I'll say this: the strong arguments that I agree with. Let's start there. Always better to start with places we agree. Um, the battery pack thing, people kept getting super excited that they're gonna have these crazy high margins. I think even in their calls, they said they target 20%. I think that's going to be hard. As you point out, there are a lot of battery cell manufacturers. For stationary battery storage, while there are software advantages, I don't think China's that far behind. They could get the um, IoT piece working, and Tesla hasn't shown a lot of prowess in pushing the solar panels, so like their advantage there is questionable. So if we compare Tesla to China, yes, I think Chinese manufacturers are going to have the advantage. The question really comes down to, and I don't know the answer, but like, does Canada, Europe, and other countries that do business with United States, are they going to prefer American made versus Chinese made because of economic relationships?
well, the world is favoring BYD right now, except for US, where BYD is not allowed to compete. US is the most profitable automotive market, and BYD is not even allowed to compete in here because of government protectionism, as well as in Canada. So, um, the fact that BYD is earning more money with higher profit margins than Tesla is, it, despite being pushed out of or kind of kept out of the most profitable market, I think speaks volumes. But the rest of the world is obviously choosing BYDs over Teslas because BYD sells at half the price of a Tesla, and you get pretty much everything you get with a Tesla, except for the brand name and
Are we talking stationary storage or car?
cars.
I was talking about stationary storage, but I think we could talk
Well,
about
I mean,
cars separately.
the same is gonna happen with stationary storage. Tesla will be limited to the US, and BYD and CATL and other players will supply the rest of the world.
So you don't think other countries like India and others are going to have big trading blocks against China
I mean, I don't know if India is a big market
for
when it
stationary
comes to
storage?
this. Yeah, I mean, when is that going to happen? And why can't they do on their own?
I mean, yeah, I mean, every country could theoretically do it on their own, right? Like, I think the geopolitical part is hard to figure out. I will give you that.
Well, I don't think on stationary storage it really matters that much because it's a very simple process. 80% of the value by my estimate is coming from battery cells. And obviously Tesla doesn't produce its own battery cells except for 4680s, which is barely ramping at this point. So
Very fair.
yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it turned out to be a very commoditized product, even more so than cars, which is saying a lot because Tesla doesn't make any money in cars. So yeah.
I agree. I think the whole argument was supposed to be like, the Tesla grid, like they did in Texas, smart power routing, stuff like that, but they haven't really announced any improvements there. So I think that's the strongest argument you have in the article that I agree with, where analysts might be valuing something that um, maybe shouldn't be valued as highly.
Yeah, especially in China. I mean, a lot of people think that Tesla Giga Shanghai Megapack production is going to double, triple profits, but I'm willing to bet that Shanghai Megapacks will not be profitable at all, ever. And just from the simple fact that Tesla is buying battery cells from Chinese battery makers and then putting its brand name on it, calling it Megapack, and then selling it.
Okay, there's a big difference between a battery cell and a battery. Like that's not the same thing. We have to have a BMS. You have to actually,
I understand, but BYD and CATL produce most of the batteries in the world, so they know the BMS and the battery pack and everything too. You know that they're not. So I don't see how Giga Shanghai. I mean, I would be surprised if Giga Shanghai ramps to full production at all. To be honest with you.
so let's talk about it. Let's break it down a little bit because this is the thing I'll challenge a little bit. Let's focus on Tesla Shanghai batteries versus BYD like
Okay,
batteries in
before we
Chinese.
do that, can I get Steven's take on retail sales real quick? Steven?
Yeah, I mean, not a lot of takes. I think January though that we've seen the last 2 to 4 years, all January data is really noisy. In the past, people would blame winter and seasonal effects, but I don't really know what it is. So, I mean, retail sales did look weak, but like I was saying, unemployment data looks really strong, and um, CPI and PPI was kind of a mixed bag.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, unemployment gets worse after retail sales drop, not before, so that makes sense. But we can have a macro space separate and discuss more about this. Thank you. You can stay up if you want to talk about Tesla. Meta, so what do you think about Giga Shanghai prospects?
So I think when you compare Chinese-made cars versus American-made or other country-made cars, there are other factors, right? Like environmental regulation, costs around that, the costs around labor, the hours people work. There's a whole bunch of different factors. So I think comparing Chinese manufacturing to Chinese manufacturing is a fair comparison. And if we look at it from that perspective, the question is if BYD can make battery packs and sell them, and Tesla can make battery packs and sell them, does Tesla need to buy all their cells from BYD? If so, obviously BYD will have an advantage. Completely agree there. But I'm not sure that they actually have to buy only from BYD. They can actually buy from many
Yeah,
different manufacturers.
they buy from CATL and they mostly buy from Chinese battery makers. That's the point. So if your concern is geopolitical, then how in the world will Giga Shanghai make any money in China when the product is even more like 10 times more commoditized than vehicles are? And if
Yeah,
Tesla
I
can't make
agree.
money in cars in China, how is it going to make money in a product that is 10 times more commoditized? I don't see, and also doesn't supply its own batteries, and batteries comprise 80% of the value of megapacks as opposed to 20% of the value of vehicles. It makes no sense.
I think the counter argument I would make is if Tesla Shanghai ramps up and it does well, and the BMS that Tesla has performs better, they're going to be able to squeeze out more power out of the same cells because they work in parallel very well and they do better temperature control than an equivalent battery made by the other manufacturer. And the
Yeah.
reason the reason
Yeah, it's a lot of ifs, but we're not seeing any sort of we don't see that materialize in Tesla vehicles today. I mean, BYD is killing Tesla in vehicles, and I agree with you that vehicles today are more software than hardware. So that means BYD is greatly capable in producing software. Chinese players are obviously. I mean, we've seen DeepSeek as well.
have you
Chinese.
compared have you
Mhm.
compared Tesla China sales to BYD China sales? Like I think you gotta
Yeah, yeah.
reduce
It's
it
not. It's not
at
even
a mass, right?
close. It's not even close. When
But
I say half
you're
the
comparing
ASP, that's in China.
hybrids to batteries now as well in that situation.
No, I don't think so. I think BYD's EV sales growth is exceeding Tesla's growth as well. And by the way, like I don't really disagree. I don't really agree with the whole like EVs, hybrids. Like people want hybrids. They don't want the EVs today. And it's assumption to say they will want EVs in the future. I agree. In a robotaxi future, EVs have an advantage. But with EREVs, which is a new phenomenon in the last year or so, extended range EVs, which are closer to the EV side than hybrids are. So if you think of a spectrum, you got diesel, gasoline, traditional hybrids, plug-in hybrids, and then EREVs, then BEVs. Tesla only produces BEVs. Now many other makers starting to produce EREVs, which are proving to be almost as efficient as BEVs, but has a gasoline capability as well. So it kind of gets you over the hump of where am I going to charge it. So that might actually be the most popular solution in the future, I think. even when
So
it comes to robotaxis.
so here's a couple of things I think should ground us. I think sometimes you're using market financial data and then backing that out to like an engineering comparison. And I think we got to separate the two because there's a long lag between engineering solutions and when the markets finally catch up. I don't think it's instant. I know you're going to make the argument that information transfers quickly, but I don't think that's true. Even still to this day, I'll talk to people who have range anxiety. And then when I ask them, okay, well, how long does it take for you to drive before you have to go to the bathroom? There is like a aha moment of like, oh wow, I didn't even think of that. I really don't need that much range if blah 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 blah. Supercharging networks, all that stuff kind of changes things. So even in the situation of an EREV, if anything, the next vehicles people buy might be EREVs, and then they may realize they don't actually need gasoline. And then they might go to battery electric vehicles after that. So there is a huge chasm for BEV adoption. But the global climate problem isn't going away. So ultimately, we still have to eventually move there. I can agree with you that like change in administrations and the clear push for selling more fossil fuels from American exports, it probably delays things by 4 years. But you know, headaches are going to continue. Like the health is going to continue to decline around the world. Eventually, many countries will. Sorry, I got a call in the middle there.
That's okay. Um, yeah, that eventually is decades away. Clearly, I mean, even Elon isn't worried about climate change at this point.
Are you sure about that, or is he just saying that because he's placating Trump? Because even in his space when he was talking to Trump, he tried to rephrase the argument from a ppm. Like particulates in the air will cause defects, and so even if you want to make the argument that temperature control and water rising isn't going to be the issue, I think what he's doing is he's trying to argue differently because the original arguments aren't resonating.
Okay. I mean, it doesn't matter because the governments don't believe it anymore. The governments are rolling back all sorts of mandates, pushing out all sorts of mandates. So, and as I always said, if Tesla is going to win the race, it's going to have to be on its own merit, not with government support.
That's totally
And
fair, but
that's specifically because I said we don't know if these programs are going to be around, and they're being rolled back everywhere around the world, except for China. China, I don't think is rolling it back, and China has obviously its own, hundreds of players that are succeeding now,
but
taking share from Tesla.
what about the argument? Because this has been the argument a long time, right? Like the ZEV credits, all that stuff. Oh, Tesla needs to be profitable without that. But if you know that revenue is coming in, you plan differently than if you know the revenue is not coming in. I think it's very unfair to look at the past expenditures and say, well, if we remove the ZEVs from there, then what would the company's situation be? Of course, if they knew that credits weren't coming in, they would plan differently. They wouldn't grow as fast. They would control their capex differently.
Well, you have a limited amount of time to grow to a certain point, and we're seeing with Rivian that if you don't grow fast enough, that you never reach gross margin profitability.
Agreed.
And BYD today came and exceeded Tesla sales at a shocking speed. I don't think anyone expected it, and that would have been even faster if Tesla wasn't supported with literally tens of billions of dollars of incentives. And I listed these incentives today in a post. I think a lot of people kind of just look at one or two of these things, but they're very, very much varied. And these are just the ones we know, by the way. There's a lot of incentives that Tesla benefits from we don't know about. So that list is at the tip of our screens. You'd see.
Can you like how elastic do you think Tesla's demand is in regards to some of these credits and things like that? Like when we saw Tesla cut prices pretty significant in the beginning of 2023 with the rollout of some of these credits, it didn't seem like demand picked up very material, and that was before Elon was nearly as political as he is now.
I think it's hard to kind of look at one incident and say, like you said, like you did, and say it doesn't work. It doesn't work because there's a lot of different factors involved in the equation at any given time. But Troy has many examples from around the world in many countries where when the credits end, sales plunge. And he's also talking about in his Q1 deliveries estimate that he just published publicly. He's talking about how some sales were pulled back into Q4 because people were worried about Trump getting rid of the EV credits. So Q1 sales are going to be crushed. I mean, there's no question about that. I mean, Kalshi is looking at 370,000 vehicles now. So
And are they adjusting for the fact that the new Model Y has started shipping?
yeah, I mean, it depends. Obviously Q1 is going to be, to some extent, people are going to wait for the lower priced Model Ys, so they're going to delay their purchase. But Q1 is going to be very bad in terms of margins, sales, bottom line, top line, whatever line you want to look at. It's going to be a bad, bad quarter. And Q2, how good it will be, I guess, will depend on at that point where the rates are, where the economy is. Like we saw today, retail sales massively missed expectations, including auto. And also where obviously some of these other things are at the time, like interest rates, um, and what the price is for the Model Y is. But also, like if you kind of recognize the fact that Model 3 Highland did not lead to a huge Model 3 um, improvement, sales improvement, or margin improvements. Tesla had to cut prices repeatedly. Tesla's executives had to go on live streams promoting the Model 3 Highland. And now you can get a Model 3 Highland at $250 lease price, which is so cheap. And it still doesn't sell. I mean, it's basically free if you account for gasoline and maintenance savings. And just people do not care. They don't want a Model 3 Highland. They don't want a new Model 3. And I think that's going to be even worse for the Model Y because um, because of the latest political saga.
Okay, to
So
ground this a little bit, how have Toyota sales done in the same time period that you're talking about here? Because just putting this out there, if the global car sale market is declining and Tesla's facing headwinds, it is possible that you have to release model updates just to keep up, not to grow the sales, but just to keep up.
I don't think the US auto market is shrinking. I think it's growing. And why are you picking Toyota? Look at BYD. BYD grew 49% last year.
I picked Toyota on purpose because, if I recall correctly, most of the vehicles that are traded in for Tesla were Toyotas and Hondas. So that's the market that they're competing against. BYD, again, I just want to say, I think it's unfair to compare one to one because they're not selling in America, which is primarily where Tesla's currently selling, that we're talking about right now with the price cuts. If you're talking about globally, in those situations, yes, BYD is going to be more attractive because it's hybrid and it's a lot easier for people to take the hybrid that is a little more battery before they go fully to battery electric. I think it's if I was going to invest a large amount of money into what I'm building as a factory, do you really need the gasoline expertise long term? Like how long do you think, or do you think forever we're going to be using hybrids?
I think, let's say, BEVs will be less than 50% for the next decade, I think.
Of overall new car sales?
Right.
So you don't think in the next decade autonomy's happening?
No, I don't think autonomy is going to happen in the 2010s. I think it's going to be 2030s story.
Okay, yeah, I think there's our fundamental disagreement.
Yeah. I mean, here's my prediction actually on the timeline for autonomy at the top of your screens. I think FSD is improving at a predictable rate, and hardware 3 reached 1.9, hardware 4 will reach 2.9, hopefully. It's at 97 right now. And then hardware 5, 1 more 9, 6, 1 more 9, 7, 1 more 9, 8, 1 more 9, which is what you need. So I think hardware 8 is going to be when you get robotaxis. And just do like 3, 4 years for each hardware, basically.
That data
So
is that data is really the wrong way to look at it. You're normalizing by hardware as opposed to by time. the software is hardware agnostic to a large degree.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm assuming 3, 4 years between each hardware cycle. So I guess it is by time, right? It's not just by hardware.
Okay, yeah. I think you should really remember that S curves look linear for a long period of time.
I mean, this is exponential improvement.
No, it's not exponential improvement because you're pushing the date out really, really far, and then you're reducing the improvement, right? So you're saying in 3 years it increases by 9%, and in 3 years it increases by 0.9%, and 3 years it increases by 0.09%. So that's actually logarithmic.
Oh, it's 10x improvement every time.
I think we're defining the improvement differently. You're saying the loss is reducing by 10x?
Right.
Yeah, that's not usually how people refer to it as an improvement, but okay, sure. I was thinking about the overall quality is improving by a slower and slower pace in your timeline.
I think safety critical interventions are the limiting factor to autonomy. And
Yeah, I
that's
think
limited by inference on the computer, I think, on the car.
yeah, I think the idea that the safety critical interventions are not clustered and that you don't have huge step functions is where we disagree. I think and we do see this, right? Like when comfort improved, suddenly improved. When the highway improved, the highway improved. Um, The frequency of interventions and the number of unique interventions is something I think we might be disagreeing on because the number of interventions drops if the number of unique interventions that are very frequent drops much more quickly than if you just focus on the total number. And that's why I think looking at the data that way is really the wrong way to normalize.
Okay. I mean, let's see how it works out. I mean, so far it's been spot on, I never say, early. I mean, this tweet is recent in December, but this mentality I've held on to for about 6, 9 months now. Actually more than that. Yeah, oh yeah, 9, 10 months. And it's been spot on. It's predicted efficiency improvement perfectly. So let's see what happens next year.
I think you're too zoomed in. It's like, sometimes people look at those daily trading charts and you're looking at the 1 minute chart. And really, I think you got to zoom out and look at the like 1 year right now because the macroeconomics are overruling the sales. Like, and I think that might be actually why Elon is so obsessed with doing whatever he can to bring the interest rates down.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I know you think hardware 4 is going to be robotaxiable, but Troy, for the first time, I think, threw his hat on the side of not gonna be robotaxiable. And now it's me, Troy, and Machine. I don't know of anyone else who thinks hardware 4 is not gonna be robotaxiable. Steven, where do you stand on that? I mean, I guess you don't really have expertise on the area, but you can.
Correct. Yeah, no expertise.
Yeah. Meta,
I think
Meta,
it'll
you
be. I
still.
think it'll be close though.
Uh-huh. Troy said, and I tweeted today, hardware 4 hasn't achieved driverless FSD, and it probably never will. That's a strong statement from Troy.
Troy does not understand how AI works. You can go
I
look
don't
at what
know.
James Doma, who also is an AI expert, is literally tweeting out the most bullish things I've ever heard him say. And he's
He's
pretty
always bullish.
temperate.
He's always bullish. He said 2022 is going to be the year the world wakes up to FSD, and 2025 it still hasn't happened. Give me a break.
In 2022, uh, the year if the improvement rate was much higher than it was prior to that. They didn't start doing transformers until the end of 2022, so it depends on when he said that.
All James Doma does is repeat what Tesla and Elon say and say it in a calm, high expertise vocabulary, in a calm manner, high expertise vocabulary, and it gets pushed out by biased influencers. That's all it is.
Okay, all
I've
right. Well,
never,
well,
I've
well.
never heard of anything original from him. Nothing.
Okay, we can move away from there. I think if you go watch, I've seen some places where initially in the early days when people would talk about FSD, there were not a lot of people who understood how models work, and he was one of the few people who did actually speak when I would hear him and be like, yeah, he understands how AI is actually built. So in that
He
sense,
talks the
it's kind of
talk. That's it. He talks the talk. He doesn't know anything.
I think
And
it's impossibly hard to ask someone to
and
predict things
and
that have never been done before in a
and
timeline.
well, that's where the value is.
That's not
And
no, that's
well,
not true. That's not where the
and
value is.
and um, you have to recognize the fact that 99% of what you see on your timeline, on your Tesla timeline, is manipulated by biased influencers liking and reposting the things that are bullish. And there's other ways to manipulate what
I
people
think
see.
I
And that's
think you shouldn't
exactly what's
make
going on.
assumptions about how I'm consuming data right now. I think you're making a lot of assumptions, unless you're
No,
saying
no, no. I'm
general,
saying in
royally.
general. Yeah, in general. You in general. That Twitter and X is extremely manipulated. There's nothing free speech about it. It's bullshit. The idea that you can't post anything, but we're amplify what we choose. Okay. Well, how is that free speech? How is that different from traditional media? The same exact thing. And a lot of stuff I see is just complete misinformation. I posted a list of facts about BYD, and I guarantee it, 99% of the Tesla community doesn't know 99% of the stuff that are true about BYD. I mean, I listened to a recording of another space the other day, and the idiot host said, um, just repeated the nonsense about Mercedes still being 40 miles per hour on their level 3, which is completely false.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's bad news reporting on both sides. So it's for me, it's easier to talk about the engineering side of things than stock and timing. I think timing is really hard. Engineers suck at predicting timing. However, the value creation still is there. So I would argue if you're looking at somebody who's in their 20s, 30s, something like that, buying and holding something till retirement, it's a very different discussion than if you're discussing somebody who's buying something and holding it for a short period of time.
Okay. I think I got it out of my system. So what do you want to talk about, Mr. Engineer? Oh, you'd say go ahead.
For those that don't think that hardware 4 is enough, do you believe it's in the cameras or in the computer, or what's like the argument that you wouldn't think hardware 4 is enough to solve FSD?
Compute power and memory.
This is a great setup for the next conversation we're gonna have on the Titan paper.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I think let's wait another 10, 15 minutes so that Wes can join as well.
I don't think
Um,
Titan's gonna solve it. Like what people are really missing here is um, most of the improvement that we've seen in the last 6 9 months in these chatbots is coming from allowing these chatbots to think, reason, which means like just imagine yourself playing chess. If you have 2 seconds to move as opposed to 2 minutes to move, you're obviously going to make the better decision if you have in the latter situation. But that
that,
doesn't apply to Tesla. That doesn't apply to FSD. It may apply to Optimus down the line, but it doesn't apply to FSD today because you have to make decisions, many decisions in a split second. So you can't just sit there and think as you're going 60 miles an hour down the highway.
that is correct. So everything you just said is correct for a class of improvement that's happened in the last 6 to 9 months, as you just said, but you're way overstating that. All the improvement in the space in the last 6 to 9 months has been that way. And we know that for a fact because there's tons of models that respond really, really fast and very, very cheap.
You're talking about the O3 Mini, right? But they're not as accurate.
No, I'm talking about Gemini. Gemini 2.0 Flash. It
Yeah.
responds really fast and accurately.
Is the accuracy better than if it wasn't Flash?
If you give it more parameters, obviously it will perform better with the current transformer architecture. That is no longer true in Titans.
I mean, yeah, I mean, we can't wait for Wes on everything, but I read the Titans paper, and I think that it will lead to some improvements in certain situations. And I think you gave this kind of example last time we talked about it. That if you see um, a um, a deer on the side of the road, then you're going to be more careful for that stretch, the rest of the stretch of the road, because there might be other deer. And I agree with that. But that's only one class of situations. So there's going to be many, like, I don't think that covers even majority of edge cases that Tesla FSD sees. So I don't think how having a short term, medium term, long term memory improves FSD as much as the invention of transformers did.
Yeah, so I think that's a great. I want to hopefully convince you of that. That should be our objective statement to bounce around to get to it. And I think that if I can convince you, let's just start from here. If I can convince you that memory will no longer be the constraining factor, and that when you remove memory from the constraining factor, you can effectively put a model that is equivalent to something that's 10 times larger on the same hardware or even larger, then how does your perspective change on the hardware discussion?
It doesn't, because you need many orders of magnitude, not just 10 times.
Got it. So how much bigger do you think the models need to be for FSD to work?
With the current architecture, 10 to 15th power.
10 to 15 more zeros behind it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's absurd. That's absolutely absurd. Uh,
And
just
my timeline at the time actually includes assumptions for such improvements on the software side.
okay,
So
so
when
you're saying you need 10 to the 18 bits.
15.
No, well, you said from where we are today.
Mhm.
There's billions of parameters in the model today. That's actually 9. So you're saying 10 to the 24. You need something on the order of 10 to the 24 parameters.
I'm not saying anything about parameters. I'm saying I think hardware, compute power, and memory with the current architecture is going to have to be able to um, um, work a model that is 10 to 15 times larger. I guess that's what I'm saying. That parameters.
Yes. Okay, 10 to 15 times, not 10 to 15 orders.
No orders.
Okay, all right. Let's start on
10
why
to
that's
15th power.
okay. Let's start on why that's kind of absurd. So it's not as absurd as it could be. Otherwise, I would use this reference. But there's a we know how many atoms there are or an estimate of how many atoms there are in the visible
And this is, by the
universe.
way, just 1 second. This is for nationwide mass adoption of robotaxis. Okay,
I
so
hear
if you
you.
want to focus, start from a kind of like Omar's block where it actually works 99.9% of the time or whatever, then maybe it's 10 to the 10th power, not
No,
15.
that's not what I'm going to start with. So
Okay.
so let's we could precede the Titans conversation here. Let's start here. So if you look at the way neural nets work, why do thinking models work? That intuition, I think, is necessary first to understand how sparse these models are. So most of the time, when you send in your input, you're not feeling the entire context. For specifically going to DeepSeek here, right? Let's talk about DeepSeek first. So you have a context length. Let's, for simplicity reasons, just say it's 1,000 words, right? Just to simplify our life here. If there's 1,000 words, most of the prompts that are getting sent in are probably 100 words or less. Again, I'm fuzzing here because of just simplicity. That means 90% of the input layer was zeroed out on the first request that went into the model. The intuition is if you can get the model to be verbose about what it's thinking and send out a bunch of thoughts, you can then attach those thoughts to the original input and feed it back into the model. Now you're using far more of the input layers. So maybe the first time it goes through, it's now using 200, then 300, 400, 500. You get 10 thought iterations. Now the context length is actually full. So now you're actually using all the neurons to uh, reason about the original 100 word prompt. That cycle, that's one approach, but that's one approach to make the input layer actually fully used because you had to make this model really large. That's where the thinking process for DeepSeek gets its benefit. That's why the same parameter size can do far more. It's because you're actually using far more parameters in the decision-making process. So, so that's unique to LLMs. That doesn't apply to image-based stuff because images do have large stuff. And in the case of Tesla, they know exactly how big the input is every single time, so they can right size their model from the start. But their problem is most of the pixels in the image aren't useful. So they have a different problem, which is like their input layer is full, but then within a few layers, as you go into it collapses really, really fast because as soon as you start collecting features and information from it, you've now collapsed. And unfortunately, the way these matrices work is the height has to stay the same, or more or less stays the same in most designs. So
Yeah.
this causes problems, but there are many opportunities for them to find ways to get the rest of the matrix working again.
Yeah. I mean, look, I understand what you're saying, and I think this is great theory, but you know, we're gonna have to see it actually happen. So, can you make this a bit more concrete? Maybe a prediction of how good FSD will be in a year when they, if and that we're also assuming that Tesla AI will implement these methods like with deep seek innovations and stuff,
Time
right?
is not a function of innovation. So I'm gonna say that it's good to learn lessons from past mistakes, and giving you timelines leads to dangerous results. So a timeline doesn't make sense. I can tell you what the steps are, but I can't really tell you a timeline because I don't control what the engineers decide to do. I couldn't control that they decided to ditch V11 and go to V12. Like I think V11 was more than sufficient, and that's how Waymo got there. So they didn't really need to jump over to fully end-to-end single stack. I think that was a mistake. They'll still
Okay,
get there, but
so what the if I'm gonna look into what you just explained on my own time, what should I research? Can I just in like a couple of words?
um, I guess you look at the sparsity of neural nets. There's not exactly something that comes to mind directly to. It's like it's a function of things that are researched. What is it that you're trying to research? You're trying to figure out how sparse the networks are.
How much room there is to work with? How much improvement can I expect from FSD if and when Tesla AI team implements this?
Yeah, so then you're going back to the chinchilla paper at that point to understand how scaling occurs with transformers as they are designed today.
Okay, you'd see.
Meta, obviously, I wouldn't want to pin you down to a timeline. You kind of talked about next steps, and it seems like some of the first steps are improving the context window is something that you've kind of talked about, and it seems like that's kind of going to be one of the next releases that Tesla has. Beyond kind of that next release, what would be the release after that? So, like maybe let's say two major releases from now, something that maybe would, from a timeline perspective, potentially be like later this year, maybe October through December timeframe. If the context window expansion is maybe let's say spring to early summer.
Yeah, I'm surprised at how slow the context window expansion is taking, to be honest. Like, so the one of the things that makes it really hard for me on a timeline prediction scale is I am, and like in the past, people would say, "Oh, Tesla's the best team," blah blah blah. I'm surprised by the speed at which Tesla AI is moving. It may be because of other constraints or various things. They don't have enough hardware. They're compute constrained, whatever it might be. But I think the pace of papers is outpacing the speed at which they're iterating right now, which is um, with all due respect, I think they're doing really, really well. They have a hard problem. They probably have a lot of constraints. There's probably good reasons why that's happening. I don't think it's just a staffing thing, but from the outside looking in, it doesn't look like they're trying all the things they could. They talked about using MCTS, a Monte Carlo tree search at AI Day 2, and I still haven't seen that. At least they haven't talked about it in the release notes. If they are using it, maybe they are, but the release note updates that we're seeing aren't communicating those things. And we continue to see them talk about the context window coming soon, coming soon. I suspect that they might end up calling it V14 when that comes out because
I mean, the context window, they need to train with larger clips. Is that not correct?
they already have those clips.
I
They
know
have
they
to,
have the clips, but they
correct,
need to run the training process with
correct.
longer clips, right? Okay.
They
So
need they
that,
need to do a foundational model retrain.
exactly. So that, good job, Meta. You're getting the point. But that requires obviously um, more GPUs, and Tesla doesn't have that.
It doesn't require more GPUs. It requires them to prioritize how they spend those GPUs.
Yeah,
But yes, I would agree that like maybe
exactly.
starting Optimus at the same time as finishing FSD is not a great idea.
Yeah. So obviously, Waymo, who is funded and owned by Google, who designs and produces its own GPUs, where the reader iteration cycle is much tighter, feedback loop is much tighter. They are also vertically integrated AI research, is moving much faster. than Tesla today.
I agree. I don't think there's any question. I'm not one of those people.
But here's the thing. Here's the thing. That's not going to change. Why? Because Tesla Automotive is not profitable. So Tesla won't have the money to buy the GPUs to make that change.
Yeah, so I would look at it like DeepMind, Waymo, they're like a research firm, right? They're spending a lot of money on the research. They do have that advantage. Apple wasn't the one to invent the touchscreen. They still got the lion's share of the smartphone market. They don't make their own touchscreens, they don't make their own stuff, but and this is where it gets very bad that Elon's doing the stuff he's doing. Brand power, other putting the things together, that's what kind of like got them where they are. With Waymo, there is a 60%, like 60, just visually counting the number of sensors on Gen 5 and Gen 6. There's a 60 reduction in sensors. I did this myself. I could be off,
Wow.
but that is where the numbers are. And I was talking to James, who he came to the same number. Not James Doma. There's another James that is on the timeline, forgetting his last name right now, but he's follows Waymo as closely as Omar follows Tesla.
So you've seen a Gen 6 picture? I actually haven't seen that.
Oh yeah, I saw the two cars in person in CES.
In person? Okay, so what did they remove?
Cameras, mostly cameras, a couple of lidars, and then a lot of the forgetting the name of the term right now. Darn it, it's early. The little circles on the bottom of the car, forgetting it right now.
Ultrasonics.
There you go, ultrasonics. Thank you.
So let me ask you, how many lidars now?
I don't remember off the top of my head. I'll have to go look at my notes. I think it was 5 or 7. I don't remember exactly. It was an odd number though.
Why odd?
Oh, I think because the one on the top is not symmetric.
Oh, I see. How many lidars does Waymo's 6th gen vehicle have? Let's ask ChatGPT.
So I asked the people there, and they wouldn't give me a direct answer. I had to count it myself.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's
one high-resolution rooftop lidar, 4 additional lidars positioned around the vehicle. This is 6th gen. Built on the Jaguar I-Pace, are equipped with 5 lidar sensors.
That's wrong. This thing's
Okay,
hallucinating.
why?
Whatever you're looking at is hallucinating.
Why?
Gen 6 is not on Jaguar. So Gen 6 was on Zeekr and on Hyundai. And the Hyundai looks exactly like the Jaguar I-Pace.
Mm.
So they have a South Korean, I think, company and a Indian company making the cars now.
Okay, so I said Gen 6 isn't on I-Pace, and it says, this is ChatGPT. You're right! Exclamation points. Waymo's 6th generation vehicle is built on Zeekr and Vision platform, not the Jaguar I-Pace. For lidar count, Waymo hasn't officially disclosed the exact number for Gen 6, but based on previous gens available, it's likely 5 lidar sensors, 1 on the roof for long range perception, and 4 around the vehicle for near field. If you look, man, this is the same number as BYD's God's IA.
Again, I would caution you. I'm pretty sure this thing's hallucinating the shit out of its answers, because it should be counting the sensors on the Hyundai as well as the Zeekr. There are 2 different. So the Zeekr is the no wheel, no driver, like it's the robotaxi equivalent, but it's more of a van. And the Hyundai is exactly like the I-Pace looks like today.
I mean, I only care about the autonomous one, the fully autonomous one, and I guess that's going to be Zeekr, right?
They're both fully autonomous. One just is. So I think Hyundai's car, they're also selling it, and then they're doing like. So like I remember walking back
Wait,
behind the
so
booth.
Hyundai is going to partner with Waymo?
Correct. That's at the booth. Yeah, I have photos I can clean up and send to you.
Oh, see, I could have included that in my article. That's a big deal.
Yeah, and I mean, this is not a secret, right? Because they clearly, but you're right. Like people don't talk about this every single time. This is the constant gripe I have. Every single time people talk about this in Tesla spaces, I don't think people are as aware. And so you'll constantly hear people say, well, their costs are cost.
Because they are pushed disinformation, not misinformation, disinformation on purpose by biased influencers. That's exactly the reason why Tesla community is not learning the facts.
I'm gonna opt out of conversations about people's mental states, but I will post. I just posted the announcement, so they posted this in October.
Okay, where are you posting it?
I just in the space.
In the nest or a reply?
In the nest. And by the way,
Okay.
Darius tagged you on this. So and James Hoffman, that's the person that follows it very, very closely.
Mm.
So I highly recommend people follow James Hoffman if you want to keep up. James Hoffman 3. He's got a pretty good handle on what's going on with Waymo.
Oh, I see. We're excited to announce a new partnership with Hyundai to integrate our full autonomous tech into Hyundai's all-electric Ioniq 5 for our Waymo One fleet.
So this vehicle I saw in person, and it looks exactly like it's like they took the pictures of the Jaguar I-Pace and they said, "Jaguar's not making this anymore. You make it," and like
Mm.
they're making it with less sensors.
So, man, that's amazing. So is Waymo buying cars from Hyundai and putting the
Yes.
sensors? Okay, in
So
Michigan, right?
yeah, and if I recall correctly, back in the day, I remember it was either 5,000 or 50,000, but it was a really large number of Jaguar I-Paces was ordered by Waymo, and they only delivered 700. And before they even delivered all the ones that they, I guess, agreed to deliver, they just said, "We're not making that car anymore." I'm not sure how their contracts were written, but they basically backed out of it because the vehicle was not profitable outside of the ones I guess they were giving away.
Yeah, I mean Hyundai does a great job with their EVs. I think they are profitable.
Correct.
So,
Correct.
so you're saying Waymo is going to have 50,000 on the field at some point soon?
I mean, I think they're limited by vehicle manufacturers, and it seems like a smart bet for them to go with two vehicle manufacturers. Oh, sorry. It's a Chinese and a South Korean. I for some reason I was thinking India, but I think Jaguar is owned by the Indian company.
Right. Um, why aren't they partnered with three?
I'm I don't know. Like, two
Hmm.
seems like 100% improvement that you're probably going to get the cars, right? I think they're just controlling for a vehicle doesn't get delivered, or maybe they're controlling for tariffs on different countries. I don't know what they're
Hmm.
controlling for.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, if you get it, like in software, you always say like getting from 1 to 2 is really, really hard. Getting from 2 to 3 is not nearly like every further increment is a lot easier than 1 to 2 because getting something to work on multiple different devices, you deal with all the problems from 1 to 2 that you're gonna deal with for most other vehicles.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess the first phase of the partnership will begin with Waymo integrating its autonomous driving technology into Hyundai's all-electric Ioniq 5.
Yeah. So
Wow.
when you look at this and you look at the fact they're going to 10 cities, like
Right.
obviously they're going to have more cars, right? So
Right.
their constraint has been the hardware thing. That's what I've been saying. The race here started, and we've got basically a year or two for Tesla to catch up.
There's no way that's gonna happen. No way.
All right. Do you want to switch to the other space to talk Titans?
Yeah.
All right. See you guys there.
Wait, hold on. Wait, what? What other space? I thought we were
Uh,
doing here.
uh, okay. I'll be right back. I'm just gonna start the space, and then the people who pop in there tell them to come here.
Okay.
Or, and this is recorded, yeah. So
I mean, I don't mind going over there. I don't care. It's fine.
okay, if it's okay, let's just go
Yeah,
there.
it's fine. Let's just
Yeah,
go over there. That's fine.
yeah. Make the
Okay.
timestamp easy. All right.
All
See you
right.
guys soon.
I'm gonna put it on YouTube as well.
Yep.
Just give me 1 second.
Oh, let me also put this. You have full authority to copy that whole space and put it out. This is the same thing. It's just a different instance. That's all.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. All right. YouTube folks, just give me 1 second. YouTube, give me 1 second to set this up. Hey Meta, can you make me? And I'm gonna. Oh, can you send a speaker invite to macro analyst?
Sent.
Okay,
I'm always
perfect.
surprised by how slow space
I
is.
know. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
so
The team,
weird.
the team who's supposed to be developing autonomy can't even figure out spaces.
It's definitely a different team. But okay.
Whatever. It's led by the same guy.
Sure, yeah. I mean, there was a moment where he was saying stuff about how RPCs work, and everybody I know was like, "What is he saying?" There's definitely
Yeah.
some funny moments with the X takeover.
Man, this is so weird. I think it's the first time my YouTube is streaming some space that you're hosting.
Thank you. I think it's also rare that I'm hosting a space. So
All right. So Titans, do you want to start or do you want to wait?
let's give him maybe another minute or two. What I'll do
Okay.
though is let me post some of the images into the chat, and then I'll put them in the nest.
Okay. Titans. Learning to memorize at test time.
Yes. Uh, or I think they should call it learning to remember at test time, but yeah.
Mhm. Over
Um,
more than a decade, there has been an extensive research effort on how to effectively utilize recurrent models and attention. While recurrent models aim to compress the data into a fixed size memory, attention allows attending to the entire context window, capturing the direct dependencies on all tokens. This more accurate modeling of dependencies, however, comes with a quadratic cost, limiting the model to a fixed length context. We present a new neural long-term memory module that learns to memorize historical context and helps attention to attend to the current context while utilizing long past information. We show that this neural memory has the advantage of fast parallelizable training while maintaining a fast inference. From a memory perspective, we argue that attention, due to its limited context but accurate dependency modeling, performs as a short-term memory, while neural memory, due to its ability to memorize data, acts as a long-term, more persistent memory. Based on these two modules, we introduce a new family of architectures called Titans and present three variants to address how one can effectively incorporate memory into this architecture. Our experimental results show on language models, common sense reasoning, genomics, and time series tasks show that Titans are more effective than transformers and recent modern linear recurrent models. They further can effectively scale to larger than 2 million context window size with high accuracy in needle and haystack tasks compared to baselines. Just one first question for you, Meta. So they tested um, DeepMind, who published
yes,
this research,
yes. This came
tested.
out before the
Mhm.
published DeepSeek stuff, so that's not included
Yep,
in it.
yep. Published and tested Titans on language modeling, common sense reasoning, genomics, time series, and also needle and haystack. Which one of these apply most to FSD and Optimus?
Needle in the haystack and any of the other reasoning ones. They're domain specific, but obviously none of those are vehicle real world specific. But I would say needle in the haystack applies to everything.
Okay. I'll do some more research. I'm going to take some notes, do some research on needle and haystacks.
Yeah, so I
All right.
actually wanted to start with needle in the haystack because I was
Okay.
thinking about how to go through this space. I think we're just going to start now, and then people can join when they join. My thought here, and my hope is, Yaman's really good at, when we used to go on our walks, pushing me to like simplify things. So what I would love to get is I'm gonna make a claim that this is a big deal, and it should change people's thinking about how hardware and models go. I'm gonna make the big claims in the beginning, and then I want you to like, as far we can in an hour, and whatever your hard stop is, say that it's easy to understand and the claims make sense. Whether or not you're convinced at that point, we can obviously that'll be a fun conversation, or I need to go back and like do more work, whatever the case might be. So that's the goal. I have three claims, and however you want to do it. I think we start with the easy ones, and then we can work our way to the more bombastic ones.
So my hard stop at 2 actually got shifted a little bit, so I
Okay.
can go like 2:30, 3 o'clock.
Yeah,
Okay.
up to you. I'm very
Okay.
grateful for your time. So thank you. This is clearly very helpful for me. So that's why I chose you as the counterparty for this. So the first claim is this may, and I'm going to stick my head out, just make bold claims. I think this may be the first paper that has the potential to break the chinchilla scaling laws. And that's been a hard line for any model to pass for the last 2 years. And boy, have people tried, right? So this did not publish a paper showing that. It would require you to like train many models and do a lot of things. I'm sure there will be follow-up papers in that space, but that's my claim number one. And then we can talk about the effects on things from there. Number two is
Hold on one sec. On number 1, when you say Titans has the best potential to break chinchilla scaling laws,
yes.
can you kind of quantize the potential here? Are we talking like 1%, 10%, 20%, something?
I I have a hard time getting hard numbers on that unless you actually run the experiments. I think
Okay.
it, in my opinion, I would not be surprised if it's 10 to 100x.
Hmm.
And for those who are unaware, chinchilla scaling laws basically are ignoring thinking models that have become more popular right now. The only way to get better quality was in text models. The scaling laws were around 10x tokens for training gives you a doubling in quality, and a 10x reduction in your quality goal um, requires half as many parameters. So there was a 10 on one side you have to increase by an order of magnitude, and the other side you get a halving or a doubling depending on which direction you're looking at. But that was basically it, and that's what I think kicked off this race to the bigger and bigger model you can build. You just throw more money at it and you get higher quality for free. Well, not for free, but without additional innovation.
Yeah.
And so I think that kicked off a race that caused an explosion, and that's why these models are now costing like $200 a month by some providers, right? Which is crazy. And then now I would argue with Titans, they're actually demonstrating something so powerful, and I will ground these, right? So my second claim is you will, within 2 years, have something as powerful as ChatGPT 4 on your phone.
Okay. Titans will allow Chat GPT 4 on your phone.
Or a model with ChatGPT 4 level quality. Yeah,
Hmm. On your phone by 2026, and by means by the end of.
correct. And then I'm going to make the boldest claim I've ever made, and that is, I think this gets us one or two innovations away from AGI, and I can name those, but I'll leave it. I'll leave it for that discussion.
Okay, so this is the third one.
Correct.
1, 2, 3. 1 or 2 inventions. What's the difference in invention innovation?
Same thing. I
Okay.
was just saying like big breakthrough, like this. I'm not talking about like small iterations and things like that.
Okay. Away from AGI. Now you saying this is the biggest breakthrough since Transformers, right?
I'm saying this is the biggest breakthrough uh, that from a academic perspective. Like obviously, DeepSeek was a really big breakthrough. There's a lot of implementation breakthroughs. There's a lot of application breakthroughs. There's a lot of people throwing money at it, so they got to higher quality bars. But I'm talking about like actual software architecture.
Now I was going to ask you about DeepSeek here because when you said on your second one, Titans will allow ChatGPT 4 quality model on your phone. Doesn't DeepSeek already do that?
I would argue no, but okay, sure. Um, let's say uh, O1 level quality, if you want to put it there, right? Like choose your model. I guess the claim I'm trying to make is the models on your phone will be so good in 2 years that you don't need to go to the cloud unless it's like exceptionally rare cases. Let me rephrase that. I'll
Hmm.
make this claim this way: models will start moving from the cloud to on device.
No,
more.
I got you. But that's all, that's already happening. And obviously that's gonna happen more, yes. But how so the claim you're making around claim two, or the things you're saying around claim two are just kind of continuation of what's happened already.
Sure. Okay. Maybe it's not as aggressive of a claim as you'd like, but I think
Hmm.
it's a bold claim
Hmm.
because I think um, as many people probably know, I work in model compression. I think it's a very big jump in model compression that is allowing what would normally run on a data center to run in a phone. And the reason why I'm using that GPT-4 as an example is that's a model where at this point, the only reason why they're not making even bigger models is because they consumed all the tokens they could find on the web, right? They've run out of tokens to consume, and they've generated a bunch of synthetic stuff, and they run out of synthetic stuff to consume. So that chinchilla paper, we ran with it as far as we could on just throw more and more tokens at it, and now it's kind of like, crap, we can't throw more tokens at it. So then they start making the models bigger to try and get more quality out that way, and of course you hit financial constraints at some point. So that's as good as the model can be. I'm going to make the argument that DeepSeek on the phone is not as good as those, strictly because of the time it takes to respond. So it takes way longer to get your responses, which basically limits applications like assistants and things like that.
Okay. Does Titans reduce the need for building out data centers?
Yes, in my opinion, over
Okay.
time, not immediately.
How come? Can you explain that? So first explain why, just in your opinion, not a fact. And secondly, why over time, not now?
I think first there will be a long amount of foundational retraining, so there will be a large cost allocated to that. People are not going to get it right on the first try, so it's going to take a few iterations. There will be some breakthroughs following on from here, right? Like we got llama from the chinchilla paper, for example, um, llama 2 or 3, I forget which one it was, and then um, yeah, I think that will continue. There will continue. Like it's not like this paper is going to be the be all end all of this space. There'll be more iteration in this space, and then people will retrain again. But as we hit like our plateau on this set of innovation, at that point, I think the next set of innovation isn't going to be requiring more hardware. So like this moves us away from throw more hardware at the problem to use that hardware that you already were throwing at these problems for training, but you don't need even more unless you have other ideas to try.
Now, I hear what you're saying, but doesn't this paper just reduce the need for more memory and not necessarily computing power?
There's a high correlation between memory and computing power.
Okay. At the inference time.
Both training and so
Okay.
the memory increase and the compute increase is both correlated with parameters. Parameters are basically like um, numbers that you try to learn. So it's like putting uh, okay, let me back up one. For the purposes of this discussion, I think it'll be helpful for us to come up with a way to think of neural nets that is a little bit different than I think normally we discuss. Um, Let me see if I can describe that, and you tell me if it makes sense, and I'll answer your questions. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. So, if we go back to like, high school math, for many people may not remember, but like, x squared uh, plus y squared equals, m or whatever equals 0. There's an equation for a circle. Um, and it turns out, on graphs, you can draw various shapes with basically equations that operate on x and y in the 2D space. Similarly, in an n-area space, you can draw complex shapes with just equations. So the intuition behind a neural net policy, as it's called, is it's an equation that has, a number you're going to learn multiplied by a dimension, so x or y, or another dimension, and then you just sum those all together, and then you end up with a bias you add at the end. And it turns out that equation, if you have that equation and you have enough of these style of equations, and you put them together, you can kind of describe any shape in an n-area space that you want. So one way to think of neural nets is it's a collection of these equations, and the matrix or the parameters are all those variables kind of put together in a neat grid, and you have to kind of learn what those values are. And so you put a whole bunch of data in there, and you basically say, okay, I'm going to draw a circle, and then I'm going to have some data values that I know should be in the circle, some of the data values that should be outside the circle, I'm going to give it a value that I know the value of. And then if it's wrong, I will adjust those variables so that it's less wrong. And I keep doing this during training. And then during the test phase or inference, you're going to see how accurate it was for a small set that you didn't train on. And then that's how you evaluate how well you're doing. Benchmarks or however you want to call that. So that's kind of like the mathematical way. Now, if we look at that, if you can reduce the size of the matrix, you reduce the number of multiplications you have to do. And the multiplications are what is computationally expensive, and also remembering all those values is no longer needed. So that's what's memory intensive.
Makes sense.
So the holy grail is to be able to have a smaller parameter model be as performant as large parameter models. And I clearly am coming from a real bias on, I believe model compression is super important.
I
So
totally agree. Otherwise, it's going to take decades.
yeah, it's not
Yeah.
it's not scalable, right? At some point we run out of chips,
Right.
which is probably where we are now. So I posted a picture in here. I'm surprised. I guess people couldn't make it, but I posted a picture in here for our discussion, and it's from the paper. And I think it's the most important graph in the paper. I should have kept the sequence number. I think it's figure 6, I think. But what I want to do is if people pull that up on your screen, what you can see is
Yeah.
there's
It's
two
on
graphs.
YouTube. Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. Yeah, there's two graphs, right? There's few shot setup and there's the fine tuning setup. Briefly, what a few shot setup is where you take something, you train it, and you're done training it. And then it's keep in mind this paper was written before DeepSeek, right? So it's the earlier description I did, I think in the earlier space was, hey, you've got an input and you run it through a model, you get thoughts, you add the thoughts around the input. Now you've got more and more of your input layer filled out. You can keep doing this in a loop and you get a more and more of your input layer filled out, which activates more neurons, which allows you to come to more reasoning and
But it
intuitive
takes more
things.
time, right? It takes more time.
It takes more time to fill that
Okay.
out, yes. So that's a process to generate what we would call shots. So few shot is an approach where you take the inputs, you know that you're dealing with math, so you'll have like a prompt that you put around it to say something like, I'm going to ask you a math equation, think about math, think about it step by step. And so you have like a system message, if you will. So like few shot, the concept is basically, if you don't just give the raw input, but you have learned something to give around it in plain English with the original prompt as input, and that's the example of few shot. And then the fine-tuned one on the right is an idea where you can obviously combine these two, but
So just 1 second. So
Mhm.
isn't, I mean, just a plain English example of few shot, if I say guess and you make a guess and I say hot or cold, and depending on that response, you adjust your guess.
No. So few shot, the best example of that is if I said, um, I want you to tell me what 2 plus 2 is. And the model didn't get it right a lot, but sometimes it gets it right, right? And then I say, hey, I just found out that if I tell the model, hey, 1 plus 1 is 2, 3 plus 3 is 6, what's 2 plus 2? And it always gets it right, or almost always gets it right after that. That's a phenomenon we observe in models. This is why few shot works quite well, and it's very good because as a programmer, you don't have to retrain a model. Let's say you take an existing model and you say, I'm going to use this for flirting text messages. So I go in there and I say, here's an example of if the person says this, respond like this. If the person says this, respond like this. They said this, and then you fill that in dynamically, and then you say, how should I respond? And then it'll give you a response. You can kind of think of it like before a basketball player goes out and to play basketball, they like visualize it, they get into the mood of it, and then they're a lot better. It's like warming up, if you will. So you got to warm up your brain a little bit with some
Okay.
examples.
Gotcha.
So that's what few shot is. The other way to think of it is mathematically, we're using more of these policies. So the input layers limit how many equations we're using when we on the initial kickoff. After that, there's all the equations, but okay, I'm going to hand wave and say, to some degree, the number of equations that are active in coming to the conclusion is kind of correlating to the size of the input that you actually send in.
Got it. Okay. Could
Yeah.
make sense.
So obviously you can express more complex shapes. And so theoretically, maybe you can do more hard problems. Now, if you go to fine tuning, what that is where we say, I have a whole bunch of examples. I'm actually going to train the entire model. And then because it's really expensive to train the entire model, so remember, like we have this matrix with all these parameters and all these weights, it's very computationally expensive to do all this during backprop.
Yeah, it's kind of like saying just drive in Austin.
Yeah, well, no, almost. So what
Okay.
fine tuning does is it says, I'm going to freeze, and traditionally you'll freeze the first few parameters. So let's say you're going to freeze the first 90% of the weights and say, when I do backprop, I'm not going to adjust those numbers. So to be less wrong, I'm only going to adjust a handful of the variables. I'm not going to go and adjust all of them. Weights, I should call them weights, not weight variables. So as you reduce it to maybe say 10%, now the cost is lower, so you can continue training more. So fine tuning is a way of saying, for 10x less of cost, so like you say you had 100 examples, you trained with 90 of them where you trained the entire model, and for the last 10 you only trained the last 10% of the weights. Make sense?
It does. These are all post-training techniques, right?
No, these are pre-training. Well, yes, they're post-training. You're right. They're
Post-training, yeah,
post-foundational model training. Yes. uh,
exactly.
but fine-tuning is a training technique. So
And
it,
these are techniques that Tesla has been using.
correct. We'll ground to that shortly.
Okay.
The important thing here is, now if we look at this graph, notice that inside this graph on the right-hand side with fine tuning, which I think is perfectly reasonable. We already do that. Many people do that. Obviously, fine tuning has more of an expense than few shot, but let's say you look at fine tuning. If you look at the graph and you look at Titans, which is the purple star or the maroon star, and you look on the sequence length up to 10 to the 6, I'm picking this on purpose. You can see it's above 90%, right? So what is this graph showing? It's showing there's these large benchmarks. They have long text. They're hand created. They have some context, they say, early in the story, and then maybe somewhere in the middle of the story and somewhere at the back of the story. And then they ask you, hey, what is, they ask questions about that context. And if you have perfect memory, you'll be able to answer the question because you can go and look it up. But if you don't have perfect memory, you can't. And so 10 to the 6 is a million, right? So that's a million tokens. And the biggest models out there right now do about 2 million tokens, I think, is what is offered to the public roughly. And what that's referring to is that's how many tokens, the context window of these models out there with perfect recall. So, and we'll tie this back to Tesla at the end. If you look over on the left, on that chart, I want you to actually look at GPT-4, right? So with few shot, GPT-4 starts out at 80%. So obviously it's not apples to apples, but you can see that a smaller model with memory is outperforming on recall a large model.
Right.
That's pretty impressive. Obviously, if you look at the few shot example in the earlier, like smaller examples, the larger model does better, but not that much better. If you look at the fine tuning setup specifically, the other thing to note is it more or less stays flat until it hits a moment of oversaturation and then collapses, right? Whereas everything else kind of gradually
Which
declines.
one? Which one does that?
If you look at B, the purple
Hmm.
stars, um,
But which line?
the Titans,
Titan's
purple.
line.
Yeah.
I don't think Titan is purple, by the way. Purple
Oh,
is
sorry, maroon.
llama. Yeah, maroon. Exactly.
Sorry, my bad. Maroon lines. I'm not color intelligent.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and this is just they do only demonstrate one of the 4 approaches that they used. There's obviously gonna be more innovation. This could clearly be improved, but the trend line is pretty clear, right? It works quite well. It kind of keeps up with Mamba, which is another model that did quite well on this. But it's important to see that Mamba starts to decline. Obviously, not all the charts have all the data because some research firm hasn't run it to validate that, and the authors of this paper didn't go and run them to get that data. Arguably, probably not worth the expense just for one chart. But yeah, so you see this is pretty impressive, right? It also is very important to note that 10 to the 7, which is 10 million tokens, which would be about 2% of the English-speaking Wikipedia. That's like huge context,
Right.
is still at 70% accuracy. And if we go back and we look at fine tuning, sorry, not fine tuning, few shot for GPT-4 at 10 to the 4 roughly, you're getting worse. So
Okay. Now let me ask you this. So obviously this is very important and critical step change improvement for language models where you're feeding, let's say 1 million tokens. But with FSD, bringing it back to Tesla, do I need 1 million tokens? Do I need to pay attention to everything that's happening in the scene?
yeah, it's a great question. Sorry, I'm getting a background thing. Give me a moment.
So while Meta is trying to fix that, one shot definition, the model is given exactly one example of the task before it is asked to make a prediction. Few shot, the model is given a handful of examples. Fine tuning, you update or train the model's internal parameters on a dataset specifically for your new task. Okay. The model not only sees examples, but actually learns from them via gradient-based optimization. Examples taken a pre-trained language model and training further on thousands of labeled sentiment analysis examples so that it is internal grades optimized for classifying sentiment. Interesting. Meta, are you back?
Yes, yes.
Okay, go
I'm
ahead.
also posting up the next thing, and we can kind of gloss over that to some degree. But Wes said he could join in about 20 minutes. We'll see. It's Valentine's Day,
Okay.
so totally bad timing and planning on my part, but it's okay.
I mean, what's everyone doing at noon for Valentine's Day?
I don't
Are they
know.
having a Valentine's lunch?
To be fair, Wes is the one who picked this time, so,
Yeah,
so
okay.
it's kind of on him too.
Yeah.
He picked today, so I'm not sure if he remembered it at the time he picked it, but it's okay. Um, uh, and obviously I like this stuff, so we can talk about it more. But so you asked the question about does this affect video models, right? Basically, more or less was your question.
Right. Do I have to
Yes.
pay attention? Like, how many tokens do I need in a
That's
video?
yeah. So a token is not actually a word, right? So it's like the smallest thing you care
Right.
about. Um,
Right.
so
It
it can
can
be
be one
letters.
letter. It can
Yeah.
be two letters. It can be
Correct.
a word. It can be a few words.
Yeah.
I get
And
all that. But um, if the token size is smaller and you have the compute and memory power to run it, you do get better results, don't you?
you can solve more problems. So, for example,
Exactly.
if somebody says count the number of letters and R's in strawberry, you can't do that if you're tokenizing straw as one token,
Right.
right?
Right.
Or you have to have some exterior knowledge about what letters are in each token, which would be weird. Um, you'd have to like specifically trade on every single word.
So
That
what's the
would
token
be bad.
size on FSD video?
Um, that is something we can calculate. So let's figure that out. So first, on hardware 3, we know that there's 8 1.2 megapixel cameras. On hardware 4, there's still only 8 because they removed one from the top, but I don't know if they actually use all 8. So it's a little bit challenging to get that number, and it's 4 megapixels. So you can multiply those numbers out, and that will give you at least that many tokens if they use 1 token per pixel. If they don't use 1 token per pixel, and I'm going to argue that they do, but if they don't use 1 token per pixel, then effectively the camera's megapixel resolution does not affect it, right? So like when hardware 4 was trained for Model 3, what that means is they were taking the 4 megapixels and they were reducing it. So instead of using 1 pixel, they were probably using 4 neighboring pixels and then averaging them down. Probably using not just an average for anybody who does this. Like you have to our eyes are more sensitive to green than red, so you have to like do uh, a weighted reduction. But anyway, you do something to that effect, and then you can kind of feed that into the model, and it just kind of works. That's probably why when they trained a hardware 4 specific model, we saw a roughly proportional model size increase, and that's because they had to increase the input layers. Now, there's other stuff that has to go in there too, like numbers representing speed, vehicle control, yaw, the and then there's a context window, right? So if you're giving it 5 seconds, you have to now multiply all of those pixels by 5 seconds because you're keeping the last 5 seconds around, and so on and so forth. That makes sense?
It does. Thank you.
Yeah. So if we calculate that out, it's 5. Just sticking to hardware 3 for a moment because the numbers are a little bit easier in my head. It's 5 times 1.2 times. Sorry, it's 300 seconds in. Sorry, 300 frames in that 5 seconds times 1.2 times 1024 times 1024 times 8, roughly. That's a large number, right? So right now with transformers, Tesla has to use 100% recall because that's how the transformers are built. They have perfect recall. They don't have memory management. There's a lot of papers that have been written on memory management, including Mamba, and that's the stuff you see in that chart that we looked at earlier. But all of those hit the same scaling law issues. This is the first one where the line looks so different, it wouldn't be surprising at all if it scales better.
Okay, sorry, can you say that last sentence again, please?
So this is the first model where the line on that chart is so different in terms of scaling, right? Like as it goes to the right-hand side, it doesn't drop
Mhm,
off as quickly as the other ones.
mhm,
So it's at least so you had asked me like 1 or 2 orders of magnitude, what was my numbers? If you look at the Mamba line, it's about 2 orders before it collapses. It can handle 2 orders more input before it collapses.
mhm.
Now, it's challenging because that's obviously one domain where it's doing that much better, but it is a critical domain because Needle and Haystack kind of represents your ability to pinpoint stuff. So bring this to FSD for a moment. If instead of just increasing the context window, they synthetically increase the context window by implementing Titans, they could increase the memory by a lot more. And maybe the vehicle would have, instead of 30 seconds of recall, now it could have 5 minutes or 10 minutes of recall. At that time, you could be at a light, see someone, they get occluded, and you're going to remember they're there. You're not going to forget they're there no matter how much time passes in that context window. In fact, with the Titans paper, what it demonstrates is if done right, you could probably remember that for as long as you need to, as long as there are not other surprising events happening. If there's like a lot of crap going on and you're like, oh crap, there's too many things, I can't remember all the surprising things that were happening, you'd have an issue. But this kind of starts allowing you to scale really, really well in problem spaces where you have a large amount of input, but the thing that you care about is very sparse within that input. Kind of perfect for FSD.
Yeah, I understand. Um, Let me ask you, how likely do you think the FSD team is going to implement Titans,
I don't think they've
percentage-wise?
even looked at the paper, if I'm honest.
Are you fucking serious?
Probably not. I mean, it came out December 31st. It
Why wouldn't they have looked at it already?
There's a lot of papers that are published all the time. Everybody has their own algorithm by which they look at papers. I can say I will be. I would not be surprised if they're looking at it now. There's definitely they pay attention. So
Okay, so well, that's kind of wild if they haven't looked at it already, or
well,
maybe they're
it
looking
came
at
out
it now.
December 31st. So I mean, it hasn't been that
I
long.
understand, but they should have a system where, especially if it's coming from DeepMind,
It technically came from Google Research, but yes,
yeah. So they should have a system. I mean, it's not like we're having dozens of papers come out every day,
yes, we
right?
do. Yeah, no, we do. We have
Dozens of papers a day,
Yeah, it's really hard to keep up with the papers. There's way too many papers, and
just from
most of them
Google
are
alone.
annoying. Maybe not from Google alone. Yeah.
Okay.
So you
Um,
do have filtering algorithms, right? Like you
mhm.
follow certain people, you look at who's on the paper, you look at which papers are referenced, and that's a good way to kind of filter out what you're actually interested in.
What do you mean by the last one? Which papers are referenced?
So if you look at the bottom of any paper, if you scroll down the bottom, there'll be like a
Hmm.
page with a whole bunch of references. If you go into like
Hmm.
Google Scholar, you can
Hmm.
actually see all the citations of a paper. So if you
Hmm.
find a paper is really like innovative in a particular area you're interested in, you can subscribe to that, and then
Mm.
you'll know when a paper cites it.
Okay, so let's say they're reading it today. So it took them 2 months to kind of be aware of it. They're reading it today. They read it. Then what happens? By the way, who reads it? First of all, is it like a some sort of ranking person, or is it a shock, or who?
I don't know. It's
Okay.
whoever, somebody in the company reads it. Maybe Elon, maybe Ashok, maybe a low-ranking
Elon's
person.
not reading it. I can guarantee
I know.
that.
It's somebody reads it, who then forwards it to their friend, who says, "Hey, look at this. Hey, look at this," and then eventually that makes their way to Ashok
So that can take
or a
months.
proposal. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's why
That
it
can
took
take
2 years
months.
for chinchilla. Like I
And
was in here talking about chinchilla, and then 2 years later, everybody's like, "Oh my god, these scaling laws."
right. And on top of that, if that's the process, if they don't have a systemic way of doing it, if it's just kind of word of mouth, it's more likely that you will never make it to the
No, no,
correct
no.
person.
So there are definitely people within the company who are probably tasked with the problem of reducing the memory consumption, right? The team that's working on the context window might be struggling to get that data to fit with just a vanilla transformer approach. On hardware 4, for sure, it's going to work, but they're going to have a problem with hardware 3. This is an approach there. Remember, like with machine in one of these spaces, I was talking about how like you could downsample, right? You could a very basic approach would be to say, I'm gonna, instead of remembering 300 frames, and then if I want to remember 50 seconds, I want to remember 3,000 frames. What I can do is I can say, I'm gonna remember the first 300 frames, the most recent 300 frames, and then I'm gonna just have a buffer. I'm gonna put every other frame into one of the buffers, and then every odd second or every odd frame, I'll load half of the frames, and the other even frame load the other half. Now you've downsampled the amount of data you need. Obviously, you can keep doing that to smaller and smaller degree. And this is a very crude way of implementing a forgetting algorithm.
Okay. So back to my original question, though. Let's say, for example, that this paper made its way. It took a couple of months to make its way to a shock. Then what happens? What's the next step in the process?
So this isn't like a implementation, right? It's not like it didn't come with code, it didn't come with any of that stuff. So it's pretty, it's damn close to as good as a paper as you want, right? Papers with code probably will have a implementation for this soon. Papers with Code is kind of like a nonprofit organization. They do this thing where they always implement uh, promising papers, and then they make that available to people on Hugging Face and things like that. Um, so at some point, I'm sure there will be implementations of this. Important thing about this paper, and I do have that on the picture right now, but let's free flow. There was 4 different approaches that they used, and it would be nice to talk about what the actual innovation is in the paper, but the they they came up with an innovative thing. They didn't know exactly where in the pipeline to put it. So instead of like just coming up with an answer, they actually show the test results for all of them, and they tell people where to put it. That's actually quite beneficial for Tesla because they don't have to do that same procedure. Now, one could argue maybe for their problem space, it's different place to place it. Who knows? But like this is like a recipe. It's already written. Now somebody has to go at Tesla and say, okay, we need to allocate a certain amount of GPUs to a team that's going to implement this, retrain a foundational model, run it against a benchmark, and see how good that's doing. That's probably
Oh my
V15.
God, that is wild. If that's the process, oh my gosh, that is wild. You need a needle in a haystack architecture just to go through the papers.
I mean, that's how it works, man. I don't know what to tell you.
That
The
is
industry
wild.
keeps moving
That is
forward.
so wild. I mean, okay, okay. Let's take a step back for a second. Okay.
Or wait, there's another way it happens. Someone
Hmm.
implements it like DeepSeek. Like MOE
Hmm.
has been out since 2018. Gemini implemented it. It didn't really move the needle much because they didn't announce any like cost stuff until recently. DeepSeek implements it, and then they announced the cost stuff, and that got everybody's attention.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. But okay, so but here's the thing. If that's the process, it's such a complex process with a lot of cracks where the right answer may never make it to the right
Correct.
person.
Correct.
They may never make it to the right decision, or they may not get allocated the right GPUs, even if you assume, by the way, that this is a perfectly well-oiled machine, as opposed to the likely scenario where there's a lot of corporate structures and people's egos, and I'm going to allocate these
Th-
GPUs to my friends who helped me out with this thing as
There's
opposed to the right
there's
person.
actually the worst thing that you're not touching on, and I'll be very honest about this.
Uh-huh.
And okay, I just want to be clear, right? There's gonna be people saying whatever. I'm gonna state facts, and then people make their own opinions from it. If you have an environment that doesn't have psychological safety, if you have an environment where people are afraid of losing their jobs, they're
Mhm.
not going to want to take risks,
Right.
including voicing an opinion about something super uh, aggressively different, to say
Right.
this nicely.
Exactly. Something that's so different that it may require going back to drawing board on hardware 5, for example, or
No, no,
Dojo.
no, 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 no. Okay, so we can talk about that. The hardware does not change at all. So the Titans are
What do
transformers.
you mean? If I understand, but the thing is like if Titans reduces the need for memory, then maybe I can use um, my, I can maybe increase um, my chips, inference chips, computing power, right?
So they're very tightly coupled. I just want to make that clear.
Okay,
As you
but
reduce
that's just
memory,
the
the
example.
computing
There
speed
might
goes
be
down.
something else. There might be something else.
Yeah. I'm not saying that there isn't, right? So SSM was like a thing that was being popularly shared around, but the problem is SSM is not going to take off because even though the research shows it's very promising, it would require
All right,
brand new hardware.
let me ask you just one question. Are you telling me that if I knew Titan paper coming out, and let's assume that it does kind of um, leads to a step change improvement in FSD or Optimus if the right actions are taken. If I knew all that, you're saying I would design the hardware 5 exactly the same, or are you saying that I don't have to change it for to get most of the improvements?
I'm saying the latter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's my point.
Like obviously you can design an ASIC that's even better because there is
Exactly.
some stuff you would change, but
Exactly.
99% of it's going to stay the same.
99. Okay, but that's not assumption. Or do you know that for a fact? Or is it more like
I,
90?
I know that for a fact because 99% of a chip is just doing matmul. Right? So that's
Okay.
just that's
Right.
the
99%
allocation.
doing what? 99% doing what?
Matrix multiply.
Okay, I see. Okay, fine. Fine. I'll drop that one. Um, but okay, let's go back to the line of reasoning where we were talking about somebody's reading it, sending it to their friend, who's hopefully sending it to the right team, who's working the memory problem, because they were smart or experienced enough to recognize that this paper would help that team. So let's say it makes it to the right team and it makes it a shock. Now a shock is on the phone with Elon and says, Elon, hold on a second, I need to read this paper that's supposed to be really good. And I reads the paper and correctly determines that this paper is something that Tesla should implement. And then let's assume for a second that Ashok has access to the GPUs to allocate to the right team to test if this paper would lead to an improvement in FSD that is worthy enough pursuing this route. Let's assume all that is correct. Okay. Um, how long is that process? We're talking years, it sounds like.
I mean that there's so many people factors involved. When it comes to
Now that,
timelines,
but okay, okay.
I think you and I just need to agree
Sorry,
that
sorry.
I'm not
Let
going
me
to
just,
make
let me
timeline
just.
guesses.
All right, fine. Forget the timeline question. But do you not agree that it's more likely that this process will happen at the organization who came up with the paper in the first
No
place,
shit.
who's
Of course.
also
Of
working?
course. Yeah.
Exactly. So, this paper's existence, although may fasten the process of Tesla getting to FSD, robotaxi FSD, and also Optimus, let's say, let's stick with the robotaxis. Even though this paper, let's assume that it accelerates FSD's or robotaxi existence, Tesla robotaxi existence, it even more so accelerates Waymo's. So in effect, relatively speaking, it reduces Tesla's competitive advantage.
Yeah. I
I
agree.
rest my case.
Okay. This space, I was
I
trying to focus on the
rest
engineering.
my case.
I have never said Tesla will own 100% of the market. So, I mean, that's a manufacturing conversation. That's a separate conversation.
As long as Tesla doesn't have something like DeepMind in the organization, forget 100%.
You're correct.
I question if you're
I,
going to have 1%.
I have said this time and time again, and I'll say it now. The analogy I use is like there's a giant mountain, and Tesla ran clockwise, Waymo ran counterclockwise. Neither of them knew which path was longer, and they both chose different paths, and they're trying to get around the mountain to the other end.
Mhm,
And now they're getting to the point of the mountain where they can see the other person coming around, and Waymo's
mhm.
clearly further ahead. What's
Mhm.
unclear is, are there going to be more uphills and downhills for Waymo to get to the final thing, or for Tesla? And right
Mhm.
now, it looks like Waymo at least can see what the uphills and downhills are that remain for them, and Tesla can to a degree too, but Tesla's still further behind. It could be downhill for them though, because hardware might be a harder problem than software.
Well, here's another fact that is stunning to me, that Elon in 2019 dissed on LiDAR so much, and every single time he's asked since then, over the last 6 years, he's dissed on so much. And he made a prediction. Mark my words, they will drop LiDAR.
They are dropping
And
LiDAR.
I know, but even BYD is now introducing ADAS systems at 3 levels: one without LiDAR, one with one LiDAR, and one with, I think, 4 LiDARs. So it's not like, it's not playing any role, even though the number of LiDARs is decreasing. LiDAR is still playing an important role, it looks like, in
All
the
right,
scaling for
I'm gonna
Waymo and others.
make some statements. Like, as data changes, as facts change, I will always go with the latest data. So if anyone wants to come back and say blah blah blah, I'm thinking Grant here specifically, I will argue the point at that time. However, LiDAR has a lot of input. So at the time of CNNs, at the time of Transformers, LiDAR was a bad thing to do, for sure. The reason why I say that is because instead of having, like, we're talking about that input layer, and instead of having more tokens allocated to LiDAR, you could have more tokens allocated to context window for camera. Similarly, that LiDAR, it takes time because you have to fire it out. It comes back. You have a processor that processes that data and then emits it out. So you have a latency that you add, and the amount of layers you can process in that time, because of reaction time, you've now lost that capacity. So if you can, with camera only, in that same amount of time, infer everything you were going to get from LiDAR with reasonably high accuracy, you don't need LiDAR. So I don't think Tesla's problem today gets solved with LiDAR at all. I think they have reasoning problems, not perception problems, definitely not distance perception problems.
Doesn't LiDAR improve perception at all in any case?
No, it only improves distance perception.
Okay, so in some cases it does improve.
Sure, but like, unless we're seeing instances of Teslas crashing into stationary or other objects, and we can see that it wasn't a dynamic situation. It wasn't that like Tesla knew the object was there and didn't decide to brake early enough. Like, it wasn't that. It was more that it didn't even know that it was there. Unless we're seeing evidence of that, I don't think LiDAR helps. I don't think it's been a long
So
time
then,
since somebody
so
showed a
then argue the
video
other side.
of
Why
something
why is
missing.
Waymo still have LiDAR at all, or why is BYD adding LiDAR at all?
Yeah, so I'm gonna argue the other side, and this is where we have to be very mindful. If Waymo already had something like Titans implemented, or Waymo was confident something like this was coming, or, and I think it's more likely this one, they knew they could ablate the LiDAR out eventually when they continue to scale upwards, and they thought the cost of LiDAR was going to continue to decline. They said, let's throw all the expensive hardware on the car so that makes solving the software problem easier, because Waymo made the bet that the software problem is the harder problem to solve. Tesla, on the other hand, didn't have billions of dollars to just throw at the hardware and not ship a car for years. So they had to, by necessity, innovate on a way to make the vehicles affordable, get that out the door, and then solve the uh, predict the hardware they need to solve the software problem. And then they went the data route, whereas Waymo went the parameter size route, if you will, using an analogy to chinchilla.
Yeah,
Both
makes
valid.
sense.
Both are valid.
Hmm. Yeah, given their own constraints, both made
Exactly.
the right choice.
Exactly.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
Humans win at the end of the day. but
Hmm.
it it's, if you go back in time, there's absolutely no way. And I've worked in this space for a while. I'm just saying, like, I don't think it would be it would have been unreasonable for somebody in 2017 to say, model's going to compress this drastically for sure. We're going to bet the company on it.
Hmm.
Even as I optimistic as I am, I would have thought that was a dumb bet.
Hmm.
Anyway, so let's check back in on the claims if you want to do that, and then
Yeah.
maybe we can. I want to be respectful of your time because I know it's 7 minutes too, and
Yeah.
you said you have a little more time.
Titans has potential to break chinchilla scaling laws by 10x to 100x.
I think that one's pretty
Titans,
clear, right?
yeah. I mean, maybe in, let's say, in certain use cases, maybe not in all cases, right?
I'm gonna say in any case that requires uh, keeping a lot of things or considering a lot of things, and then uh, like a lot of tokens, I think it will work. It'll scale better. And Chinchilla is all about that to a degree. But now, if
I
you were
mean, but
saying
but
like
here's what I don't
simple problems,
understand.
then no.
Like when I'm driving, I don't need um to know everything that's going on, every pixel of what I'm seeing,
Your brain
right?
does do this. Your brain does do this actually.
What does it do?
Your brain takes in light on all your visual receptors, and
Hmm.
then your eyeball in your visual cortex decides what to actually pay attention to. Right.
Hmm.
So hence the attention is all you need. You
Hmm.
you pick what to attend to, and then from there you start doing reasoning. So our brains
Hmm.
are really good at taking a really, really, really big set of input layers, drastically dropping it down. And so
Hmm.
this is why I thought V11 was a better approach, right? So to solidify this, our brain has cortexes, many different cortexes. Within a cortex, it has really high interconnect. So very, very expensive, just like a transformer, arguably.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, Between cortexes, it has lower interconnect, right? There's not as many, there's not as much neural tissue connecting them as there is within a cortex. So the visual cortex does a bunch of processing, reduces it down to just the important stuff, sends that off to the frontal lobe, or wherever, maybe it goes occipital lobe, wherever it goes.
Hmm.
From there, it does processing, comes up with ideas, and it actually sends it to multiple lobes, right? So you got your thinking fast, you got your thinking slow, stage one, stage two reasoning. In your fast twitch, it's probably like, oh shit, car, hit the brakes, and you don't even like, it doesn't even go to your frontal lobe. Your foot's already moving
Hmm.
before you realize why you're doing it. And then thinking slow might be like, oh, there's a slope. It'll be more comfortable if I move the foot in the following way so that the accelerator is adjusted and I won't feel jerk, right? And then maybe that's going through your thinking slow process. I'm
Hmm.
making this up right now, but
Hmm. Hmm.
you know
Okay.
that that concept would have been more similar to our brain had they gone with V11, where they were going to have a perception model that was going to emit to a control model. And I was really
Hmm.
excited about that approach. That is the approach Waymo has used. Instead, Tesla said, we're just going to use one giant matrix. And I think the problem they're having is they're not getting the advantage of the perception matrix has to be very tall, and you're using a very tall rectangle. So let me back up one. A good way to picture matrices in this case is picture a cube where the height is the input, the width is the number of layers, and the depth is the number of training cycles. So the volume of the cube is your training cost. The surface of the cube is your inference cost. In the case of perception, you need something really tall, but maybe you don't need it to be that wide. And in the case of controls, you need something not so tall, but you do need it to be very wide so you can
Hmm.
do deep reasoning. So this concept of separating the two allows you to have one cortex that's tall and one cortex
Hmm.
that's short, but the surface area of both cortexes could be the same.
Hmm.
And it also lets you play around with throwing some of the surface area around. That allows you to get way more out of your hardware.
So today, would you advise Tesla team to go back to V11?
That's a hard one.
Hmm.
I um
Do you want to get fired?
yeah, going and telling somebody they're wrong ain't exactly the right move.
Uh-huh.
They're also very
Honestly,
close.
I'll tell you one thing that I have done that actually in my career once.
I've done this many times in my career, just to be honest.
And
We can talk
and
about this offline.
and I was the person who gave the advice on the other side too.
Yeah, actually, I have this thing that I like to do, and we've done this many times, but I don't know if I've ever said it out formally. But I used to think growing up, if I was the leader of the country in which I was born, or let's say the president of America, um, if you, I'm Canadian, I don't know why I was saying it that way. I have to think if I was the prime minister, I was the president, and you have to reason about all these complex topics, and you can't possibly know everything about everything. So how do you make a decision when there's two people with opposing views? And my solution to this is you have them argue the opposing
Hmm.
side,
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
and then you pick who's most informed on the opposing side, and then you ask them when they're done arguing and in the heat of the passion and say, okay, which side do you support? If they still support the original side, they clearly know more. So go with them.
Yeah.
Hey,
Yeah,
Wes is
that's
here. Just in
so
time.
cool.
We wrapped up. I'm kidding.
Oh, sorry. Valentine's got in the way. My apologies.
Totally fine. Give my apologies to the wife. Yaman, do you want to?
Yeah, we can continue
do
for
a
another
quick
half
summary?
hour or so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll tell my Valentine that Wes just showed up.
Awesome.
Thank you for letting me know, Yaman. Okay, so if you're up for it, let's have you summarize where you think my claims are crazy to Wes, or what the claims are, and then we can maybe go from there.
Yeah, Wes, did you get a chance to read the Titans paper?
Yep, I read through it.
Okay. Number one claim: Titans has potential to break chinchilla scaling laws by 10x to 100x.
Whoa. Wow.
No,
If
you
that
want to
happens.
discuss?
These claims are pretty bold, Wes.
Oh my goodness. Okay, go. Give me the lot. I want to hear all of them first.
Number two, Titans will allow GPT-4 or O1 level model on your phone by the end of 2026.
Okay.
And then number three, we are after Titans, we are one or two innovations away from AGI.
Oh, wow. So 2 and 3, I agree with. One is really interesting. So can you tell me a little bit more about that? Why you think that way?
I'm basing this on figure 6. I have it posted in the nest if you want to
Great.
take a look at it. Since you've already read the paper, I'm just going to go through it quickly rather than explain the whole thing.
Yeah, please.
If you take a look at the fine-tuning setup and you look at 10 to the 6, the sequence length of 1,000,000, you can see it's clearly above 90% recall on fine. This is the needle and haystack benchmark. Needle and haystack benchmark, yeah. Right?
Yep.
And then if you look at the few shot setup for GPT-4, it's below 80%.
Yes.
Or about 80%, whatever it is. It's not 90. So if you took a GPT-4 fully trained and you gave it few shot examples, or you took a much smaller model and you gave it a little bit of fine tuning, which cost wise is still going to probably be a lot cheaper than training GPT-4, the smaller model has better recall.
Right.
And then if you look at the paper on the fine tuning setup, Mamba obviously super designed for that purpose, but extremely computationally incompatible with today's chips.
Right. I'm not even familiar with Mamba, I'll be honest.
Okay, all right. We can cover that another time. It's an interesting paper. It's great academically, terrible if you're trying to use today's architectures, hardware architectures. You notice that it starts to fall off at 10 to the 4 or 10 to the 5. And so at least one order of magnitude is present in the sequence length being 10 times larger and not falling off. And I'm trying to say potentially 100x, because even if you look at the 10 to the 7, which is 10 million tokens, 2% of Wikipedia, English Wikipedia, that is about 70% accuracy. And if we go back and look on the few shot example for GPT-4 at 10 to the 4 is where you hit parity.
I'm looking. I'm trying to line those up.
Just notice that it's between 60 and 80. There's going to be some fuzzing here. Don't be super accurate on the 70.
Close enough. Close enough.
Yeah, and you got to remember, like, this is a paper, right? They haven't like optimized this shit out of it yet.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, it was, obviously, like, the end of the year, like, literally.
Yeah, literally the last day of the year.
Yep. So when we think about timeline,
but now you get to say this paper came out in 2024, right? That's the important part.
Yeah. I know folks out there who like to ensure that they get it out before the end of the year for certain conferences.
Yeah, NIPS.
So yes, that's the one. So yeah, at the end of the day, what are you thinking timeline wise for this 100x?
I'm trying
Are
to
you
avoid
thinking?
timeline estimates because I'm bad at it. So we can
Yeah,
talk about
I know.
continuing stuff, but I'm trying to avoid timeline
Well,
estimates.
it's super interesting. Now we're seeing like two different kind of methods to fine tune at test time. So I'm very confident,
We can talk about
that we're very confident that we're seeing these non pre-training scaling law. I mean, I might be the best way to kind of say it at this point. It's just it's fascinating, how fast this is progressing. So I feel like making that, it's a big bold prediction, right? Because 100x is
Yep.
not something to sneeze at. That should get us very close, if not to AGI. So the
I still
other,
think there's two things left. We can talk about those are in a minute.
which I'm interested to hear about, because AGI is a definitely an overburdened term at this point. So maybe give me your idea of what you think that is, if that's help frame the conversation.
Can we pin that for a second? I want to finish
Sure.
the memory conversation first.
Happy to. Yep.
Okay. Because I think the other one is really fun and it's very philosophical, and we'll just go on
Okay.
as long as we want. So specifically, I think this is worth going over. So I posted 4 pictures up here of the 4 different iterations that they did. Importantly, there's a paper from NVIDIA. I'm forgetting the name right now. Huma, or I forget the name. It's quoted in the paper. And they showed if you have learnable independent weights, data learned in training, but test time independent weights.
There you go. I was just going to make sure that we're talking about test time here.
Yeah. So it's learned in training, but it's test time independent. Those weights prevent you from having a lot of like bizarre behavior. So I want to explain what that is, and I think that will explain why this approach is far superior to DeepSeek. So that's my axiom claim here, right?
Excellent.
So,
okay, great. I'm looking forward to hearing it.
Okay, so if you look at any one of these pictures, let me just pull one of them up.
I'm looking at one.
I'm not going to be explaining what's in the picture itself, but just if you look at that core sequence, right? Pick any one of them. Just for simplicity, let's all look at the one for MAC, so that we're looking at the same picture. If you want to follow along.
Yep.
So you have your input sequence, and then you have this. So for people want to follow along, an input sequence is like a vector, right? So it's just like one word after another after another, and so it's just like a line of stuff where the position in the sequence matters. That then gets transformed. Now in this picture, let's ignore what's happening in this picture, but that usually gets transformed in something like DeepSeek. So what DeepSeek is doing is it says send the input sequence into the model, have the model generate thoughts, then send the thoughts back, append them and prepend them to the original sequence, and now you have a longer sequence to send in. So this works, and one of the reasons why this works, you already know this, I'm going to skip going back and explain things, but like if you think about the number of policies that you're optimizing for, if you don't have a very long input, you're not going to be able to activate a lot of neurons early on because your input layer is zeroed out for the bulk of it. So as you add more thoughts, you activate more neurons. It's kind of like few shot, except instead of using a benchmark where you have to like have somebody give a whole bunch of examples, and then because few shot's not applicable to many domains like FSD, right? Few shot's great for something like math, or the example I use like a dating app flirting response thing, or a healthy diet suggester based on what's in your fridge, right? So few shot works for those kinds of things, but it doesn't work for something where it's super dynamic, high data rich environment, right? Like FSD. So in those situations, theoretically, if time was of no consequence, you could have thoughts be printed out, and then that effectively is a way to generate those shots, right? So that's why I think when we look at these charts, we should consider few shot and thinking as similar performance, most likely. However, the downside of thinking is you have to cycle through multiple times. So if you're going to include 10 thoughts, you've reduced your response time by 10x. Whereas here, you're not. You're still going through it once. You could actually add thinking to this too. There's no reason why you couldn't. But I'm going to argue that is not necessary, and these pictures explain why. In theory, we might see in between people do both, and then eventually you don't need it. But the first argument is, if you look at learned data independent weights, those effectively are, if you said to the model, hey, I want you to come up with a system message where if you said that to yourself before every single thing you do, you would have a better performance. And you allow it to not just learn the parameters in the matrix itself, in the attention matrix, but you also let it learn the parameters in this system message. That's effectively what that is, right? So it turns out, instead of having humans write these system messages, you can have the humans just focus on the examination, right? It's a bitter lesson, repeating always. Turns out we don't need to tell the model, hey, think it through step by step. It can figure that out itself. And there's a paper called Aping on this, automatic prompt engineering is like a thing. But all the automatic prompt engineering stuff is always trying to find stuff in the English text token space. What happens in this model world is you take those English text tokens, you turn them into what's called embeddings. The embeddings are what the math actually operates on. Here, you let the model actually just learn the embeddings. So if you were to try and convert that into English, it may not actually make a lot of sense. It'd be like broken English, jot notey, but it's like, it doesn't need to write the system message for a human. It needs to write it for itself. And so it might even make up words that it understands a certain way. It may make up expressions and stuff like that. So it's kind of a cool concept that you let the model have this persistent memory. So that's one reason it starts to perform better. And then the other reason, and I think this is really cool, is they basically said attention is all you need. And the corollary to that is forgetting is all you need, right? Attention is choosing what to pay attention to, and forgetting turns out to be a similar thing, right? Like choosing what not to pay attention to.
Right.
And so what they don't write this out in the paper this way, but what I get when I read the paper and the interpretation of it is, a silly thing we did was assume if you take the context window and you continue to slide it forward, that was a good approach. What we learned in the attention all you need is paper, all you need paper is every time we tell the model what to do, we're wrong, right? Like that's a bitter lesson. That's always the case. Well, the sliding window effectively says, when I have filled out the context window and I'm considering the next token, the best thing to forget is the oldest token. That was an
Always?
implied assumption.
Oh, okay. Keep going. Sorry.
Yeah,
I'll
because
let
you're
you finish.
sliding forward, right? So like when you consider the next token and your context window is full, you forget the oldest token. So that was just a function that was accepted as the function. And then there was a lot of papers that came out and they're like, hey, what if we don't forget the oldest token? Like if I'm looking at a sentence, dropping the word the before dropping other words probably makes sense, because I can probably read the sentence still and understand what the point of it is, right? Like it's like jot notes. I don't know if anybody's taken like, if you see like the people who like take notes when people are speaking, they have like a whole like nomenclature of the way they write stuff, and they don't spell out the whole word. They just keep little notes, and you can drop vowels in words and people can still make out what it's saying. So there's a lot of things you can do to compress what's actually there if you allow it to be for the model, not for a human, whereas thoughts are for humans. So with that insight, you can then say, I wonder if we can come up with a forgetting function. What function should we use? And they do in the paper talk about surprise as the core thing they ground on. But what they do that's really smart is they say, we're not going to tell the model what the function should be. What we're going to do is we're going to train another model, another attention matrix. That's what you're seeing in those pictures with the cube and the little maroon colors in it. And you say, why don't we let the model learn what to forget, and also let the model learn what to attend to. The fourth image that's posted here, the one that says LLM, the reason why it looks so janky is because it's not from the paper. Sorry, LMM. I made that a very, a rudimentary one on my phone. But for whatever reason in the paper, they have 4 architectures that they talk about. And for the 4th one, they didn't bother to make an image. They just said, they described it. So I just drew it. But it's basically, the 4th one is where they say, let's just replace the attention net with this forgetting net. So instead of paying only attention, you also pay attention to surprise. And how much surprise and how much surprise momentum you have is also learned. So these are parameters. So anyway, It's a very interesting paper because if you look at the flow of how things go, they basically said, look, we know we need the persistent memory. We know we're going to use a transformer, and we know we're going to use a second matrix, which is basically a transformer, which allows us to reuse the hardware as it is today. Now it's just a question of where we put it in the sequence. And so the 4 things that they tried were actually trying putting in all the different sequences. And of course, in the paper, they conclude maybe some mixture of the two or something would be good, but this is basically the paper summarized. So I think that's the core observation here is they're not going to require you to have thoughts. Instead, those thoughts get learned. And then as you're reading, every time you're surprised by something, the model in that particular moment remembers it, but it doesn't need to emit the thoughts so that you send it back to it.
Gotcha. So in this, can I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
Cool. So just to frame my understanding, in the past, there's been no kind of like dynamic memory allocation
Correct.
or structured kind of application of what to do with the memory. It's basically just flat. And
No,
you
no,
just add to,
there were 2 papers. There are a few papers. I haven't read all the papers, but there are at least some papers that tried using a vector, and there was some that tried using a matrix, but they all fell into this bitter lesson trap, right? They said,
yes.
oh, forgetting the oldest token doesn't make sense. I
Yep.
know what makes sense, and they kept telling the
Yep.
model what to do. And it turns out,
Yeah,
actually,
that's what I'm
go
getting
back to
at.
the original paper.
Yes. So now you're basically just the paper is describing a way for AI, the AI itself, the model itself, to effectively dynamically control the memory. And
Exactly.
you are programming in 3 different ways for it to do that. Is that correct, or is that those different ways more learned?
So those 4 different ways were
Oh, there's 4.
experiments. Yeah, there's 4. There's 3
Oh,
pictures in the paper. If
yeah.
you, I made the 4th one because there's a 4th section for LMM. It's in all the charts, but they didn't put a picture. They just kind of
Gotcha,
like,
gotcha.
I
Yeah.
think they got lazy. They just were like, whatever. Just we're not going to draw this picture for whatever reason. It's kind of a weird choice, but yeah, there's 4 architectures. And what this paper actually is showing, which is I think very nice, is they demonstrate how each of the 4 architectures perform, but they also go in a lot into so the key innovation is that forgetting matrix.
Yeah.
The second question you then have to ask is like where to put it, right? So
Yep.
question number 4, they have 5 questions that they try to tackle. Question number 4 was, does the forgetting matrix, like, is a matrix the right approach? It's a leading question because obviously that's what the whole paper is based on.
Yep. So where do you think this great kind of impact is going to occur? Any one of these, or all of them in concert?
It looks like MAC or LMM, right? So LMM is the simple one where you just replace, you just take existing transformers. It has the minimal amount of change is to say, change the attention model today, which learns what to attend to based on what gave me the most reward. And what we do in PPO and all the other stuff, GRPO is a little
Yeah.
different, but in PPO, what you do is you say things where it's called clipping. So things where you got it right, don't reward the neurons that much, right? So feed the neurons that found something, I'm going to say surprising. That's not how PPO described, but find things where neurons found something surprising and got it right, give them more reward. But the problem with PPO is you only do it for that one moment. You don't do it for the tokens that sequentially follow. And what this paper does is it says, if something was surprising, probably the next few things that come are also going to be equally surprising, right? Like as a human, when you're surprised, you remain surprised and more attentive for a period of time, and then your attention wanes when it's no longer surprising. So not only do they allow that momentum to be there, they also let the model learn that on its own. So it's like, you've been surprised, now learn how surprised you are. So they derivatively just keep saying, I'm not going to tell the model anything. I'm going to let the model figure it out itself.
Right, right. And that I think is also the key, is the bitter lesson. You can't tell it anything. You just
Correct.
have to let it do it on its own. Yeah.
And initially, if somebody were to propose this, you might look at it and say, "Oh, that's just going to be computationally insane." What is surprising is that the attention model can be reduced so dramatically and still
Yes.
compete.
Yeah. Yep. I agree.
So I was saying this earlier. I don't know if you were on here or not, but this I think goes to reinforce why V11 was a better approach than V12. Having 2 matrices dedicated to different things allows you to have overall parameter count that's far lower than having one giant matrix.
Might be some trade-offs there, but I can see your point.
Yeah, and that's the perception control would have been arguably better, because the shape of perception might be quite different than control. And if we're modeling the human brain, our brain has motor, sensory, and frontal separated out.
Maybe for folks that are listening, and you mentioned this a little bit, but this can be used kind of maybe in parallel is not the best way to say it, but can be used in conjunction with the R1 method. So you don't have to necessarily say like, you know, one is necessarily better than the other. They can both feed on each other potentially. And I did miss this paper. In fact, when I went back and looked at the stuff that I had done with it, the only thing that I had done is scanned over the abstract, and I'm like, oh, dynamic memory. You know, maybe that's just a way that, you know, Google is trying to make the context window, you know, seem bigger, but not really. And I didn't dig into it. And then I watched a bit of Matthew Berman's overview of the paper, and I never made it through like 3 minutes of it, which is hilarious because I usually watch all of his because they're really good. But now that you've pointed this out and like made it obvious, like this is it's a huge win. I'm really looking forward to seeing like actual benchmarks, you know, when that occurs, because I don't think that that's happened yet. Am I correct?
They have benchmarks in the paper, but it's always better to see benchmarks. I want to see Hugging Face and others independently.
Exactly. Yes, thank you. Of course, third party. I want to see, because that's the whole point of the paper, is that it's able to be reproduced by third parties.
And this is a real paper. It's not a technical report. This is a real paper.
I know. That's why I want the third party. I'm literally waiting on the same thing for Hugging Face to do R1.
In fact, I would say if there's any PhD candidates listening, this is probably a good thing. If you're looking for a PhD thesis, go get your PhD.
Hey, Wes, let me ask you a question. So how likely do you think, out of percent, let's say assign a percentage likelihood, how likely do you think Tesla FSD team or the Optimus team will use this paper?
I really like the idea of using this for Optimus. I think that gives because, you know, the bot doesn't have to move through space at a, you know, like very consistent speed and move with traffic. It can take its time. It can weigh options. It can think more. Chain of thought is much more applicable to that context. So I like the idea of that.
So keep in mind, this does not require COT. This is I would say, from a academic lens, not market or any all that stuff, but from an academic lens, they're orthogonal to each other. Because this is pushing for the model to keep its thoughts in its head, and DeepSeek is arguing you should have the model say everything it's saying, thinking out loud. And what I would argue is, if I was driving and I had to say everything I was thinking out loud before I made my decisions and listen to myself, I'm going to be so slow on reaction time. So that will never scale. I think it's dead on arrival, in my opinion. And I think this is the actual path forward.
R1 doesn't need to output those tokens, though. It could be more.
It does, because it has to feed them back into itself.
At a given level, yes.
Correct.
But it could be pushed. It could be pushed down.
Yeah, but that means that effectively your matrix, if you have 5 thoughts, your matrix is 5 times wider.
When you think about this, let's maybe go back to Titan. When you think about this, why do you think that it's better to do this at test time versus just increasing the learning rate and doing this in one of the levels of the model? You know, in your like back propagation.
Yeah, it's a great question. So if we look at the MAC image, the thing that's labeled learnable data independent weights, that is the persistent memory that is trained during training time, not during test time.
Yeah.
When you look at the neural memory at the very top, and it has retrieval and the neural memory update, the neural memory matrix is learned at test time. So it's not really learned. I want to make it clear, right? It's as much learned as the attention matrix is learned. So It's actually not the same at all as when you hear shoot, totally blanking on his name. The NVIDIA CEO say test time compute, test time compute. Yeah, this is actually the opposite. This is saying test time compute will plummet.
Well, what? You
Plummet.
cut out.
The demand for test time compute will plummet.
Oh boy. Oh boy. Wes just sold his NVIDIA shares.
That's hilarious. Okay, so why are you saying that? Can you be
Hey, all
more
I gotta say is I
succinct?
only bring you guys the best papers. I'm not gonna bring the run of the mill stuff.
Because
I could be totally wrong.
obviously
To be clear,
I
this is
don't feel the
this is
same way.
radical, so I could be completely wrong.
Wes,
Nobody will make any investment decisions based on what I say.
Yeah. So Wes, so based on what you heard, do you now think more likely for FSD or Optimus? And also, if you could please just assign some sort of percentage likelihood of Tesla AI team implementing this on the ID product.
Yeah, I think there's high likelihood they're going to look at it and they're going to potentially try it and they're going to definitely have discussions about it. They probably already have. I mean, it's middle of February. Paper's been out for 60 days, almost 50 days. So when and they probably had early access to it too. I wouldn't doubt because peer review is a good thing. So at the end of the day, I feel like yeah, definitely. Now, is it applicable? Yeah, I do because there's the opportunity for the bot to stand and utilize whatever memory it has because it might have a limited amount of memory, and over time you just want to be able to use the memory that you have better, and this is a way to do that.
But that's also true for FSD.
That very, very true. Yes. I don't know what the kind of like latency of this is, so I don't know how fast it can output
that was exactly my point to Meta as well. Yeah.
It's computed in parallel. So in the paper they go over it. I think it's in 3 somewhere. The forgetting matrix is updated at the same time as the attention matrix. So it's all done in parallel. You take no performance hit.
It's in section 3, huh? Well, why am I not finding it? I'm looking through.
Give me 1 second. I'll give the exact section. 1 second.
Yeah, I'm into section 3 here. Yeah, maybe I'm missing that there's actually no latency. There has to be some amount of time between.
It's 3.2.
How to parallelize the long-term memory training.
Yep. They explain the math simply first, and then they go into how you optimize it. And if you read that paper, that section of the paper, keep in mind, I would say, Wes, when you read it, think how existing transformer architectures on ASICs work, and that's why I think this design is brilliant.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, are you basically saying, and I'm happy to go through this at a deeper level, are you basically saying that as inputs come in, the model is able to guess and predict what the output should be in no latency? Like
no. It's
what are you saying?
If your forgetting matrix is the same size as your attention matrix or smaller, you have no additional latency hit. You have compute hit, but you don't have you have compute and memory hit, but you don't have a latency hit.
Thank you. Yeah, and I get that. So totally, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what is the cycle time.
Just to cement the awesomeness of this. We know the chinchilla scaling laws, so we know that if you want to get a half reduction in quality, you can cut your model down by 10x. In this situation, you're just cutting it. If you cut your model down effectively in half and give the other half to forgetting, and that improves your performance by a lot for the same exact saturation on your hardware, you get a huge win.
Right.
For the exact same reaction time. So basically, as excited as I am about context window coming for FSD, I wish they would just go implement this now. This might be the thing that saves them from the decision they made to go fully end-to-end on one model. This might be the thing that actually makes that a good decision.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I see where your thoughts are. Gotcha.
Sure. Can you repeat the last sentence, Meta?
I'm not super, so I need to think about this a little bit more, but I will say it this way, couch it a little bit. From V11 to V12, they decided to go from having the ability to independently shape the perception matrix and the control matrix to a single matrix where they cannot independently control them. So the parameters are just willy-nilly everywhere. If they introduce this memory and it allows them to reduce the size of their context window, effectively they can keep all the inputs and everything the same, and now they can allocate the unused neurons instead of wasting them. They can now use them for this forgetting approach and this memory approach, which would allow them to effectively have it appear as if they have a much, much longer context window. So a long way of saying hardware 3 with this theoretically could perform things that it couldn't possibly have done before this paper. That's with the caveat that hardware 3 performs well for transformers, which I suspect it does because it's obviously running transformers right now.
Yeah.
Say a question for you. Like, how well do you know DeepSeek R1?
Pretty well. But
Okay,
you
good.
can ask me questions. I can tell you anything you want.
Okay, great. How would you compare how R1 handles memory at test time versus Titan? In other
okay.
words, the details are kind of sparse on, maybe it's traditional, maybe it isn't.
So there's a lot of innovations that they have. I've been negative in some spaces, so I want to come back and be extra positive about this, right? So MLA, great innovation, potentially something that should be brought into something like Titans. That's basically caching at the layer of this computation stuff, because they have an observation that it turns out a lot of the matrix multiplications you're doing, a lot of the attention lookups you're doing are the same. So if you introduce a cache for the most popular lookups, you can speed things up. So that's, I think, comes out of necessity because of where they are with the chips that they have. They also had really good implementation for internet, the interconnect on the 800s versus the H100s. They also had multi-token prediction, which is pretty cool. I think that's very domain specific for LLMs, but definitely
Gotcha.
something to think about as well.
Gotcha.
And then
Stay positive, man. You can do it.
GRPO is their shining thing, right? I think GRPO has the most promise out of everything. However, I don't know if it's necessary, but I think it has the most promise. Now, the thinking process, the thoughts come out and you feed it back in. I might just be, I'm an outlier in my industry on this. Everybody else loves it. Sam's obviously pushing for it.
I was
DeepSeek
just
really
going to say
embraces it.
you
I'm not.
should definitely reference Sam here.
Yeah,
What he
Sam,
said.
yeah. Go for
I
it.
was going to. Okay, yeah. Sam said all their future models are going to be chain of thought.
I think in the long term, that's a bad bet.
Well, that's where his mind is at. I think folks should know that.
No, I know. I agree, and I think that's where the industry is going. So I'm an outlier on this, and I'm a nobody on this. So I'm probably wrong.
I mean, for whatever it's worth, I like 4.0 way better than 0.1 or 0.3.
Yeah.
Well, the model distillation is a huge benefit. You would agree, right?
Yeah. The most promising thing out of the DeepSeek papers, because there was more than one, it was, I think it was DeepSeek Math, but they demonstrated how if you take all the thoughts on a really big model and you put them on a scratch pad, and then you pass them off to a really small model, you can actually get equal or better performance on the small models.
Yes.
So it's a new
Yes.
distillation technique, which is really cool. That's a very different way to do distillation than we've traditionally done distillation. So that's very promising. Yeah, that's another really big, cool thing. Only problem I have with that approach is most of the performance people are seeing is because they're allowing it to feed back into itself. And so you're comparing effectively a model doing multiple shots where the model comes up with the shots versus models that have 0 shot. And that's not a very fair comparison because the latency is huge. Like the difference is massive between the two, right? Real-time solutions, embedded solutions, anything where you actually want reasonable response time are out the window. So for something like the deep research stuff, maybe that makes sense, but those are already thinking models, right?
Right.
So yeah, maybe I'm a little negative on that. I'm way more excited about Titan, and I think the DeepSeek thing is the wrong direction.
Wes, let me ask you a couple of the questions I asked Meta before.
Yeah.
So, do you think Titans or DeepSeek? Let's stick with Titans. Do you think Titans paper accelerates Tesla's path to vision on the robotaxis and Optimus at scale?
It definitely could.
It could. Okay. Now, if that's the case, do you agree that, let's stick with FSD? Do you agree that it does it faster for Waymo than Tesla FSD?
So great question. Great question. I would have to say yes because of the things that I know about the Waymo solution.
That you can't share?
Well, some of it, I think. Obviously they're using
And
very good compute at the edge in their vehicles. They've scaled that, I think, very well. And obviously, this model and this method was developed by Google, and Google helps Waymo, intricately and intimately and early on in the process. So they're probably working in concert a lot. And so I can see them trying these things out well before anybody else in the industry can because they have the ability to do that. So I would think that they would try to develop things like this that would help them try to, get off of HD maps and get off of more expensive sensors and, lower their cost of goods for each and allow them to scale faster. So I would have to say yes in the grand scheme of things.
But in effect, it reduces Tesla's competitive positioning against Waymo, all else equal.
It maybe in the aggregate, all other things equal, yes, but obviously other things are happening, so that's a limited answer.
Okay, so let's focus on the other things that are happening. What are the top two things that are happening today that basically says what I just said about Waymo integrating research coming from DeepMind quicker, mute?
Model distillation and test time training, allowing much smaller model sizes to equivalently perform in their given domains as well or better than much larger models. Now you have a lot more compute resources and a lot more memory to handle these tasks at a much higher reliability. That's the huge innovation that's happening right now. So
Now,
even though
but that also applies to Waymo. That's also available to Waymo, right?
it does, I believe that they have a more bespoke solution though, and a lot more reliance on fusion, which doesn't come into this process as well. It doesn't lend itself as well because the fusion aspect is a lot less AI. There's a lot less AI happening there, if any, at fusion time. So that's the part that I would worry is still a crutch.
So
Meta?
yeah, I've always had that same position, right? There's a latency on LiDAR. There's additional parameters in the input layer. But now with this paper, let's say you free up all the tokens, right? So like today with transformers, if you want to have a 5-second 60 FPS context window, you have to record all 300 frames of images and feed it into the model. Theoretically, if this works really well, you only actually have to feed the new frame. So you actually reduce your input layer by 300, right? So now Tesla only has to feed in the most recent layer, and the model with its memory will have kept what it needs to on their books, I guess, in memory. So now all those extra input layers, parameters for the input layer can be thrown to make the model even deeper, but now you're trading off reaction time. Or you have a bunch of compute that's not being used, which doesn't make any sense, or you could throw in LiDAR. And because you have this ability to attend and forget and handle the input, the fusion is being done with AI at that point. If I make that argument, does that convince you?
I can see a lot of kind of what ifs and possibilities there, but no, I'm not convinced.
Okay, yeah, I'm not fully convinced either, but I wanted to play devil advocate there.
Yeah, I fully realize though that lots of things can happen to make that a reality, but the easier path there, honestly, I think is model distillation. That's what I would continue to focus on, getting higher reliability with a much smaller model. Great that you can hold on. Great that you can build a much larger model, right? You could build it potentially like inside of Cortex, and it's this ridiculously large model that'll never run at the edge, but it handles the driving task in simulation at like 7 nines, something crazy. Well, now you just focus on distilling that down so it runs at the edge. And that may be the path that they're on, because that sounds like a pretty highly reliable path, because that's the way everything's been going, for the past 2 years, is that models keep getting smaller and smaller now and higher reliability.
Yeah, and I would argue if putting back my thought, not the devil's advocate thought, I would argue LiDAR still has a latency. So when you have not a sensor fusion issue, but a time issue. And the Alberta plan makes this very clear. You need to have all your variables at the exact same time. Otherwise, the model is going to be very confused because you're giving it distance metrics that are delayed. And the neurons are going to probably say an object is somewhere, and the distance metrics are going to say it's somewhere else. And the neurons will be correct. So why even have the LiDAR in there? And then the second piece, is if they bring in this memory model and they still continue to feed the 300 frames, they could keep the model, or they could trade off for a little bit less reaction time, but let's say they keep a bunch of the frames still. They still activate all those neurons. It's effectively allowing the neurons to learn different things from the same images. And so theoretically that redundancy might still help. And the memory can now make it seem like instead of having 5 seconds, instead of having like 3x context, they have 100x context. In fact, done right, you could keep that memory model around between drives, and it could actually do something better than federated learning in that it would learn your behaviors and stuff like that. It would be a little tricky how they preserve it between software updates, but not that
it's
tricky.
a big stretch.
Not that tricky. Not that tricky. Much better than federated
stretch.
learning, because you don't have to send it up and then send it back down. It's actually learned by the model, and it learns how to forget, and it learns how to repair and amend. So yeah, could actually be quite good. I would say just flush it every time you send a new model, and then people have to have new personalization learned. But I think people would really love it if like their particular area, it learned what they needed. And you could even have it write down thoughts for itself and then distill that back to itself in the future. And the thoughts would work because that'd be like model update agnostic. Anyway, the point is there's a lot more you can do if you free up parameters on the input.
Okay. So Wes is saying basically that the Tesla team likely has looked at this, discussed this paper, but more likely that they will stick with their current path of trying to create a model, a big enough model that can drive, instead of changing paths and basically having to reround the foundational model, retrain the foundational model. Is that right? Is that a good summary, Wes?
Yeah, I would generally agree with that.
Okay,
Wait, so you think they've actually looked at this paper?
Oh yeah, totally. Why not? It's not like a long time to understand it. I would have technical discussions about papers that, drastically change the industry. I mean, obviously we're not reading, or they're not reading all of them. But
So
why wouldn't they?
the fire hose of papers is really high, and it was around New Year's. It's very possible for this paper to get missed.
I know, but that's why I'm saying, why wouldn't you have somebody that peer review it? There's, I
So Meta was saying that there are dozens of papers published every single day. The way it kind of works, organizations, is somebody notices a paper and they can pass it to their friends on the same team, and then maybe they'll send it to the team that's working on memory problems, for example, in Titan's case. And then if everybody agrees and kind of all these steps happen, then they kind of maybe meet about it. So this could take months as we were discussing before you joined.
Yeah, I get that. I just know that, when we were doing things and with Brain and DeepMind, we wanted to be sure that we had a good list of people who are leaders in the industry who would peer review before it's published. And certain papers get a lot more interest than others. For instance, this one would have gotten quite a bit of interest now that I've, looked at it with more thoughtful eyes.
But see, again, you just said yourself that you have to decide to look at it with more thoughtful eyes, which obviously you can't do that for every paper.
Right. I'm not, participating in the industry right now. I'm an armchair quarterback.
Okay, so you're
Yeah,
saying
it could be
people at
somebody's
Tesla.
job. It could be somebody's job at Tesla to actually read the papers.
Yeah, I would definitely want my engineers to have their finger on the pulse of the latest and greatest.
The real question is, how do you know that they're actually reading the papers? Because if they don't read the paper and they don't say anything, there's no way to know that they missed it.
That's true. It's just a guess.
Okay. Wes, I want to ask you, what do you think about BYD's God's Eye announcement? They have A, B, C, A being the most capable on their, $80, $90, $100,000 vehicles with 4 lidars, and then
Yeah.
B with just
Yeah.
1 or 2 lidars on like a 50, like a Model Y type of Ranger car, and then C being just vision only for their like very cheap cars, including $9,800 cars.
Yeah, I think it's a great, honestly, I really like the approach. One of the reasons is that it's literally from Kyle's video because he's been in China driving cars and he talked to owners. And I actually learned quite a bit. It's one of the reasons why I want to go to China and do it for myself because I'm really interested to know what drives or kind of has the attention of the Chinese consumer, the car buyer. And it really sounds there's a huge way that people think that they don't really think the same way in other countries, in that they just perceive LiDAR to be a better solution. That's their perception. So in these higher spec cars, I'm not entirely sure that they're really using the LiDAR a lot, because why would you have an option with just cameras? And so I think that on one side, they're trying to appease the Chinese customer. The other side of me thinks that, yeah, they do actually need some amount of LiDAR to do some amount of situations today, but they know in the future, with all these advancements, that they'll be able to update those vision only cars to do whatever the LiDAR cars can do. But I still think it's a brilliant move, and they're just trying to hedge their bets. That's what I think is interesting about that solution. But the fact that they have a vision only solution for these cheap cars tells you that it doesn't cost a lot of money to put that in vehicles. That's not a big spend. So I think that's the interesting part for me.
I mean, we knew that already. Like cameras cost maybe in total, what, $100 per car.
But to
But
make
I
it
don't,
bet
I
on
don't,
your entire fleet, I mean, it shows that Tesla's approach is valid.
I see. I don't think I wouldn't jump to that conclusion just because maybe they are not intending full autonomy with their cheapest cars. Maybe they do believe full autonomy requires lidar.
Yeah, possible, but I don't know. It doesn't look like that to me. It looks like they're saying, hey, in the future, our models are going to be so great, vision only will be a solution for these vehicles.
Okay. Did you get a chance to read my paper at all on Seeking Alpha? Okay,
I thought it was behind that paywall, isn't it?
Yeah, it's paywalled, but I think
It's
some
not
people
if
have
you
a
open
link.
it in Twitter, or sorry, on X. It's weird, but the paywall
Oh,
will
really?
apply if you open an X.
Yeah, if you could send me a link, I'm happy to, dude. Totally.
Yeah, I'll send it to you right now. I'll pin it up here. There it is. Yeah. Okay. Anything else, Meta?
No, I think we covered it. I don't know if I convinced you, but it's easy if you're already convinced of the last two. I guess we could talk AGI.
Yeah.
after a bit.
Well,
So
I think
I
so. So
really appreciate.
here's where you convinced me. You convinced me, but the things like this, I think convince is the wrong word here because I'm already assuming. So when I post, when I have my let me just post this up here so Wes can see it too. When I have my prediction about hardware 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, I'm already assuming something like this will come along every couple of years.
But doesn't that mean that the old hardware now suddenly becomes usable again?
Well, hardware 3, I guess the question is by the time we get to, so if the timeline I post above is correct, how many hardware 3 cars are going to be people are going to be using?
Fair.
And I think it increases the likelihood, but it doesn't make it certain by any stretch of the imagination. And then the other thing is, I think what the more important takeaway I got from the conversation is when you said you agreed and Wes agreed that Waymo would be more likely to be able to implement these things coming out of DeepMind than Tesla, because Tesla is not vertically integrated into AI research as much as Waymo and Google is. So that's
So-
really key, because what really matters with it's not that Tesla will get to robotaxis. I think we all agree on that. At some point, Tesla robotaxis will be around. Okay. But the real debate is what will the competitive landscape look like when that happens? If it had happened in 2020, like we was the first prediction, 1 million robotaxis in 2020, then Tesla has total domination, right? Tesla can scale, the others can't even catch up. But if it happens 5, 10 years after Waymo starts scaling across the country or the world, really now with Japan and everything, then that's a big problem for Tesla. It's the same problem. It's just it affects the other person.
Yeah. On a flip side, Waymo may not even need this, right? They may already be at a place where they don't need this. They just need hardware.
I mean, it's always helpful, right? If you're lowering your inference cost, always helpful in scaling and profitability, and
Yeah,
also
and
impacts the other players because
safety.
you can lower your prices, so it impacts the other players as well.
Yeah, and safety goes up as well.
Mm-hmm. W.
Hi. Has anyone seen drone videos from the factory where Tesla cars drive autonomous?
No one cares about that.
Yeah, a little off topic. Wes, the two things that I think are missing to get to AGI after this are um, a reward function of some kind that allows the model to self-criticize after observation. And then the second one is the ability for the model to run in a event loop that is not just triggered by interaction, but is time-based.
Isn't self-criticizing chain of thought though? Or do you disagree?
I disagree, but yeah, I think
Sounds like the same thing to me, dude.
yeah. So the reason why I say it's different is chain of thought goes in a forward pass. Like the thought is generated, comes out the other end, and then it goes back in through a forward pass. Whereas criticism, like forgetting, should go back in and adjust the attended weights. So today we don't adjust the attended weights. The forgetting arguably is very close, and maybe that's good enough. That's why I said 1 to 2.
Yeah, gotcha. I think chain of thought is gonna, take us a long way though. I think we're gonna be using that for at least 6 months, probably a year. I know
Yeah,
things
maybe.
change rapidly, so that's where I think we're gonna be.
I think
I
the
think it's gonna
momentum is there.
scale amazingly though. I'm just so excited to see how fast that scales.
Yeah, I think the momentum is there, but I think the latency will catch up to it. Like, I think there's more
Yeah,
applications.
like how much? Like what are you talking about?
I think
Latency in terms of like, 10, 20 seconds or minutes or hours? What do you
I'm talking 5 to 10x slower. So it depends on the model that we're talking about at that point. But yeah, like so if one model responds in a second, the other one's taking 5 to 10 seconds.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And I'm assuming customers do care about latency at the end of the day a lot. If two offerings exist, one takes 1 second to respond and the other one takes 5 seconds to respond, how many more nines does the 5 second one have to have for you to use that as your daily driver?
All right. I got it wrong. So it's been 3 hours. I've been in Spaces. Appreciate all the information and the knowledge and your time, and Wes and Meta. And I will think about this more, and then we can talk more.
Yeah. Wes,
Yeah, thanks, guys.
did you want to wrap it up as well?
I can hang out for a little bit, but I'm starting to do chores here.
Yeah, I don't really have anything else. I guess if people have questions about the paper, not Tesla generally, but just the paper, let's try to stay on topic there. If you do, feel free to request to speak, and then we'll do a few questions and we'll call it a day, maybe 5 minutes.